When Clara Whitmore's train explodes in the Arizona desert, she awakens in the arms of her family's greatest enemy, an Apache warrior whose touch ignites a forbidden desire that will either destroy them both or forge a love powerful enough to defy two worlds at war. Welcome to a tale of passion, survival, and the courage to choose love over everything you've ever known. Stay with me until the very end, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story of forbidden romance has traveled across the world. The metallic screech of train wheels against steel rails cut through the Arizona morning like a death cry, growing louder and more frantic with each passing second. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hand against the window of the luxury passenger car, watching the desert landscape blur past in streaks of red rock and pale sand. Something was wrong. The train was moving too fast, swaying violently as it rounded curves that should have been taken with careful precision. "Miss Clara, perhaps you should step away from the window," suggested her companion, Mrs. Hartford, a stern-faced woman who had been assigned as Clara's chaperone for this journey to her arranged marriage in California. The older woman's knitting needles clicked nervously as she worked, her eyes darting between Clara and the increasingly unstable movement of the train car. Clara didn't move. At 22, she had spent her entire life in drawing rooms and ballrooms, protected from anything that might be considered unseemly or dangerous. This journey west was meant to be the final chapter of her sheltered existence, a delivery to her future husband, a railroad baron she had met only once, whose cold eyes and calculating smile had haunted her dreams for weeks. "I said, step away from the..." The explosion came without warning. The world turned upside down in a thunderous roar of splintering wood, twisted metal, and screaming passengers. Clara felt herself thrown through the air like a rag doll, her elegant traveling dress tearing as she crashed against the opposite wall of the car. The taste of blood filled her mouth as darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The acrid smell of smoke, the distant sound of gunfire, the weight of something heavy pinning her legs beneath a fallen beam. Pain radiated through her body like fire, but it was the silence that terrified her most. The absence of Mrs. Hartford's voice, the lack of any familiar sound at all. "Help!" she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Please, someone help me." That's when she heard the footsteps. They were different from what she might have expected, not the heavy boots of railroad workers or the polished shoes of fellow passengers. These footsteps were quiet, deliberate moving with the practiced stealth of someone who belonged to this harsh landscape. A shadow fell across her trapped form, and Clara looked up to see a figure silhouetted against the bright desert sun streaming through a gaping hole in the train car's roof. As her eyes adjusted, she could make out more details that made her breath catch in her throat. The man was tall and lean, his bronze skin marked with scars that spoke of a hard life lived under an unforgiving sky. His black hair hung loose past his shoulders, held back only by a strip of leather adorned with small bones and feathers. But it was his eyes that held her captive, dark as obsidian, yet burning with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul. This was Apache. She knew it instinctively, had heard enough stories from her father's colleagues to recognize the proud bearing, the efficient economy of movement, the way he seemed to blend with the desert itself. Everything she had been taught told her to scream, to fight, to fear for her virtue and her life. Instead, she found herself staring into those obsidian eyes and whispering, "Please." For a long moment, he didn't move. She could hear shouts in the distance, the sound of horses, the crackle of flames beginning to consume the wreckage. His gaze moved from her face to the beam pinning her legs, then back to her eyes. She saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. Without a word, he stepped into the ruined car and knelt beside her. His hands, she noticed, were strong and calloused but gentle as they examined the debris trapping her. When his fingers accidentally brushed against her ankle, she felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with pain. "You are hurt," he said, and his voice was not what she had expected. It was deep and resonant, with only the faintest accent coloring his perfect English. Yes, she managed. I can't move my legs. He nodded once, then positioned himself beside the heavy beam. When I lift, you must pull yourself free. Do you understand? Clara nodded, bracing her hands against the floor of the train car. She watched the muscles in his arms and shoulders tense as he gripped the beam, and when he lifted, she pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed. Freedom came with a rush of agony as feeling returned to her legs, but she was out. She tried to stand and immediately collapsed her left ankle, unable to bear weight. The Apache warrior caught her before she could fall completely, one strong arm wrapping around her waist to steady her. For a moment they were pressed close together, and Clara found herself staring up into his face from mere inches away. This close, she could see the intelligence in his dark eyes, the firm line of his mouth, the way a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. "You cannot walk," he observed. "I'll manage," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. A gunshot rang out somewhere nearby, followed by shouting in English. "Search every car, she has to be here somewhere." The warrior's head snapped toward the sound, and Clara saw his jaw tighten. "You are Clara Whitmore," he said, and it wasn't a question. Fear shot through her like ice water. "How do you—" "There is no time." His arm tightened around her waist. "They come for you, but they will not be gentle as I have been." Who comes for me?" Instead of answering, he swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Clara gasped and instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling the solid warmth of him breathing in a scent that was entirely foreign leather and sage, and something wild that belonged to this vast desert. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded as he carried her toward the hole in the train car's wall. "Away from here. But I can't just leave. There might be other survivors, and my things, your things are ashes. The survivors are dead or dying. And if you wish to remain among the living, you will not fight me." The brutal honesty of his words silenced her protests. As he stepped through the opening onto the desert floor, Clara looked back at the train and felt her heart sink. The elegant passenger cars were scattered like broken toys. Some overturned, others split open like cracked eggs. Smoke poured from multiple fires, and she could see bodies, too many bodies scattered among the wreckage. "Mrs. Hartford," she whispered. "The old woman is dead," he said simply, a piece of metal through the heart. She felt no pain. Tears burned Clara's eyes, but she had no time to grieve. The warrior was moving quickly across the desert, carrying her with a fluid grace that spoke of years spent in this harsh environment. Behind them, she could hear the voices of the men searching the wreckage growing louder, more frustrated. "There, I see tracks heading west." "Mount up. She can't have gotten far on foot." The warrior, she still didn't know his name, paused behind a cluster of red rocks and set her down carefully. "You will ride with me," he said, and she noticed for the first time the magnificent horse waiting nearby. It was a pinto, its coat a striking pattern of white and black patches, and it watched their approach with intelligent eyes. "I don't understand any of this," Clara said, accepting his help as he lifted her onto the horse's back. "Why were those men looking for me specifically, and why are you helping me?" He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grasp the reins. "Because," he said, his breath warm against her ear, "some debts must be paid." Before she could ask what he meant, he urged the horse into motion. They moved quickly but quietly across the desert floor, weaving between rocks and sparse vegetation with the skill of someone who knew every trail and hiding place. Clara found herself pressed back against his chest, acutely aware of his strength, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his body moved in perfect harmony with his mount. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they paused on a ridge overlooking the train wreck. Clara could see the men who had been searching for her, a dozen rough-looking individuals on horseback, their faces hard with frustration and something that looked like fear. "Bounty hunters," the warrior said, confirming her growing suspicion that this was no random train robbery. Bounty hunters. But why would anyone want... Clara stopped understanding, hitting her like a physical blow. My father. Your father has enemies. Men who would use his daughter to force his hand in matters of business and politics. Clara closed her eyes, feeling naive and foolish. She had always known that her father, James Whitmore, was a powerful man with interests in railroads, mining, and territorial politics. But she had never imagined that his business dealings might put her in danger. So you're saying someone arranged for the train to be attacked just to kidnap me? The explosion was meant to disable the train and kill the guards. Taking you was to be easy after that. His voice was grim. They did not expect to find only bodies and empty cars. But you were there. Why were you there? For a long moment he didn't answer. Then, I was tracking them. I have been following this band of killers for 3 weeks. Tracking them? Are you some kind of lawman? A sound that might have been bitter laughter escaped him. No, I am Nahuel of the Chiricahua Apache, and these men killed my sister. The simple statement hit Clara like a physical blow. She turned in the saddle to look at him, seeing the pain he kept carefully controlled beneath his stoic exterior. I'm sorry. She was 17, he continued, his eyes fixed on the distant riders. Taken from her home, used, murdered, and left for the vultures. The leader, the man with the yellow hair who shouts orders down there, he cut her throat and laughed while she died. Clara felt sick. That's horrible. Justice is not a luxury my people can expect from white man's law, so I make my own. They watched in silence as the bounty hunters eventually gave up their search and rode away, heading south toward the Mexican border. Only when they were completely out of sight did Nahuel urge his horse down from the ridge. Where are we going? Clara asked. There is a place. Water shelter. You need rest and food. As they rode deeper into the desert, Clara found herself studying the landscape with new eyes. What had seemed empty and hostile from the train window now revealed itself as a complex ecosystem full of life and beauty. Nahuel pointed out edible plants, natural windbreaks, signs of wildlife that she would never have noticed on her own. How do you know all this? She asked during one of their brief stops to rest the horse. This is my home, he said simply. My people have lived in these mountains and deserts for more generations than your people have existed on this continent. There was no accusation in his voice, but Clara felt the weight of history between them anyway. I've heard stories, she said carefully, about the Indian wars, about your people. And what do these stories tell you? Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. That Apache are savage warriors who kill without mercy, that you torture prisoners and raid settlements for sport. Nahuel studied her face for a long moment. And what do you think now? She looked at him. Really looked. At the careful way he tended his horse, the gentle manner in which he had helped her, despite having every reason to see her as an enemy, the controlled grief in his eyes when he spoke of his sister. I think, she said slowly, that perhaps the stories are told by people who benefit from making you seem less than human. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or approval. You are wiser than most of your kind. Don't give me too much credit. Yesterday I thought the most dangerous thing I'd ever face was making conversation with my future husband. The railroad man, Franklin Morse, Clara started. You know about my engagement. I know many things, including the fact that Morse is one of the men who wants your father's cooperation in seizing Apache land for a new railroad line. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. So my marriage wasn't just about business alliances. It was about stealing land. Your father may not know the full extent of Morse's plans. But yes, Clara felt anger building in her chest, not at Nahuel, but at the men who had treated her like a chess piece in their grand game. All my life I've been told what to do, where to go, whom to marry. I've never had a choice in anything. You have a choice now, Nahuel said quietly. Do I? What choice is that? You can come with me willingly, or I can leave you here for the vultures and the bounty hunters. It should have sounded like a threat, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it sounded like the first honest offer anyone had ever made her. As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they reached their destination, a hidden canyon where a spring bubbled up from underground to create a small oasis. Mesquite trees provided shade, and the walls of the canyon offered shelter from wind and prying eyes. Nahuel helped Clara down from the horse, and she immediately collapsed as her injured ankle gave way. He caught her again, but this time, instead of setting her back on her feet, he carried her to a flat rock near the spring. "Let me see," he said, kneeling beside her and carefully removing her torn boot and stocking. Clara gasped, not from pain, but from the intimacy of his touch. No man had ever seen her bare ankle before, and the brush of his fingers against her skin sent shivers through her entire body. "It is not broken," he said after a careful examination, "but badly twisted. You must stay off it for several days." "Several days, but surely someone will come looking for me when I don't arrive in California?" "When you do not arrive, they will assume you died in the train wreck, which is what we want them to think." The reality of her situation hit Clara fully for the first time. She was alone in the desert with a man she had been taught to fear, completely dependent on him for survival, with no prospect of rescue. By all rights, she should be terrified. Instead, as she watched Nahuel efficiently set up a small camp and prepare food over a nearly smokeless fire, she felt something she had never experienced before: freedom. "What's your name?" she asked as he offered her a piece of cooked rabbit and some kind of flat bread. "You may call me Nahuel." "That's what you told me before, but what does it mean?" "Jaguar." He settled beside her with his own food. "It was given to me after my first vision quest." Vision quest, a rite of passage. When a boy becomes a man, he goes alone into the wilderness to seek guidance from the spirits. Clara found herself fascinated despite everything. "And you saw a jaguar. I became a jaguar. For 3 days I hunted as a jaguar hunts, thought as a jaguar thinks. I learned that strength must be tempered with patience, that the greatest hunters strike swiftly and without warning." There was something in the way he said it that made Clara shiver. "Is that what you're doing now?" "Hunting." "Yes." The simple answer hung between them as night fell over the desert. Clara found herself studying Nahuel's face in the firelight, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way shadows played across his high cheekbones. He was undeniably handsome, but it was more than that. There was an intensity about him, a sense of barely controlled power that both frightened and attracted her. "You could have left me to die," she said suddenly. "Yes, but you didn't. Why?" Nahuel was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. "My sister's name was Ayana. It means eternal blossom. She was kind to everyone, even to white settlers who came to trade with our people. She believed that understanding between our peoples was possible." "What happened to her?" "She was gathering plants for medicine when the bounty hunters found her. He stopped, his jaw clenching. "They took her because she was Apache, because to them we are animals to be hunted for sport." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm so sorry. When I saw you trapped in that train car, hurt and helpless, I thought of her, of how she would want me to show the same kindness she always showed to others, even to someone like me, the daughter of your enemy." Nahuel turned to look at her fully, and in the firelight his eyes seemed to burn. "You are not your father, Clara Whitmore, any more than I am the savage your people believe me to be." The use of her first name sent warmth spreading through Clara's chest. "What happens now? Now you rest. Tomorrow we continue south." "South where?" "Away from here, away from the men who would use you as a weapon against your father." Clara pulled her torn shawl more tightly around her shoulders. "And then what? I can't hide in the desert forever." "Can't you?" Nahuel's eyes held hers. "What waits for you in your old life? A marriage to a man who sees you as property. A father who trades your future for business advantage. a society that treats you as a decoration rather than a person. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. The choice is always simple. The courage to make it, that is what is difficult. That night, Clara lay awake staring at the stars scattered across the vast desert sky. She had never seen so many stars before, had never experienced such profound silence. In Boston, there had always been noise carriages rattling over cobblestones, the distant sound of ships in the harbor, the constant hum of civilization. Here, the silence was alive. She could hear the spring bubbling nearby, the soft sound of Nahuel's breathing, as he slept on the other side of their small fire, the distant cry of a night bird. It should have been frightening, this vastness, this emptiness. Instead, it felt like coming home to a place she had never known she was searching for. When she finally slept, she dreamed of jaguars moving through moonlight, of hands gentle enough to heal and strong enough to kill, of obsidian eyes that saw through to her soul. She woke to the sound of Nahuel moving around their camp, preparing for departure. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the canyon walls in shades of pink and gold. "How do you feel?" he asked, crouching beside her. Clara tested her ankle carefully. It was still sore, but much better than the night before. "I think I can walk a little." "Good, we must move soon. Why are we being followed, always?" He helped her to her feet, his touch sending familiar shivers through her. "The bounty hunters will not give up easily, and there are others. Others, army patrols, local militias, men who would collect rewards for capturing or killing Apache." His expression darkened. "Being with me puts you in danger." Clara looked around the peaceful canyon, then back at Nahuel's face. "Being without you would put me in more danger." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or pleasure. "You are not what I expected, Clara Whitmore." "What did you expect?" "A weak white woman who would weep and beg and slow me down." Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. "Well, I haven't started weeping yet." "No," he agreed, and for the first time she saw the corner of his mouth quirk upward in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You have not." As they prepared to leave their sanctuary, Clara found herself looking back one last time at the place where she had spent her first night of freedom. Something had changed in her during those quiet hours under the stars. Some essential shift had occurred that she didn't fully understand yet, but which felt as fundamental as breathing. She was no longer the pampered heiress who had boarded that train in Boston. That woman had died in the explosion along with Mrs. Hartford and all the careful plans that had been made for her future. The woman who now swung up onto Nahuel's horse behind him was someone new entirely, someone who could choose her own path, make her own decisions, face whatever dangers lay ahead with courage rather than submission. As they rode out of the canyon into the vast expanse of the Arizona desert, Clara wrapped her arms around Nahuel's waist and felt truly alive for the first time in her life. Behind them lay everything she had ever known. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and quite possibly death. She had never been happier. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, and with it came the heat that would soon make movement dangerous. Nahuel seemed to know exactly where he was going, following trails that were invisible to Clara's untrained eyes. They moved through landscapes that shifted from red rock formations to sparse grasslands, to dense patches of mesquite and palo verde. "How much farther?" Clara asked during one of their brief stops. To wherever we're going." Nahuel was quiet for a moment, scanning the horizon. "There is no final destination, Clara. Only the next safe place, then the next." The implications of that hit her fully. "You mean we'll be running forever?" "For as long as necessary." Clara digested this in silence. The romantic notion of fleeing into the wilderness was one thing. The reality of a life spent always looking over one's shoulder was quite another. "Do you regret it?" Nahuel asked suddenly, "leaving your old life behind?" Clara considered the question seriously. Did she regret it? The train wreck hadn't been her choice, and neither had Nahuel's rescue. But everything since then, the decision to trust him, to follow him deeper into this alien landscape, to abandon hope of rescue, those had been her choices. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I don't regret it. Even though you may never see your family again, never return to the comforts you knew." Clara thought of the grand house in Boston with its formal gardens and rigid schedules, of drawing rooms where ladies discussed nothing more significant than the weather and the latest fashions, of the suffocating expectations that had surrounded her every moment. "The life I left behind wasn't really living," she said. "It was just existing prettily until someone decided what to do with me." Nahuel turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "And what do you want to do with yourself now?" It was such a simple question, but Clara realized that no one had ever asked her that before. What did she want? "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want my choices to mean something. I want to be more than just someone's daughter or someone's wife. And if I told you that traveling with me means you may never have the chance to be anyone's wife, that you will be forever marked as the white woman who chose to live among the Apache?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Then I would say that sounds better than being the white woman who was sold to the highest bidder." This time there was no mistaking the approval in his expression. "You may survive this yet, Clara Whitmore." "Just Clara," she said. "I think I'm done being a Whitmore." As they prepared to mount up again, Clara caught sight of dust on the horizon behind them. Nahuel saw it too, his entire body tensing like a bowstring. "How far?" she asked. "Too close." He helped her onto the horse, his movements quick and efficient. "We must reach the mountains before they catch our trail." They rode hard for the next several hours, pushing both themselves and the horse to their limits. The landscape grew more rugged as they climbed toward the distant peaks, and Clara found herself grateful for every hour she had spent riding in her youth, even if it had only been in carefully managed circumstances on well-behaved mounts. The sun was directly overhead when Nahuel finally called a halt in the shade of a massive boulder. Both he and the horse were breathing hard, and Clara could feel sweat soaking through her torn dress. "Drink," Nahuel said, offering her a water skin, "but not too much." Clara accepted the water gratefully, forcing herself to take only small sips despite her raging thirst. "Are they still following us?" Nahuel climbed partway up the boulder to get a better view of their back trail. When he came down, his expression was grim. "Yes, but they have split into two groups." "What does that mean?" "They are trying to cut us off. One group follows our trail, while the other circles ahead to block our path to the mountains." Clara felt fear twist in her stomach. "So we're trapped." "Not trapped, but our choices are limited." Nahuel studied the terrain ahead, his dark eyes calculating. "There is another way, but it is dangerous. More dangerous than being caught by bounty hunters. Different dangerous." He turned to her, his expression serious. "There is a place the Apache call the Forbidden Canyon. It is said to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of the dead. My people avoid it. But you don't believe in the curse." "I believe in spirits. But I also believe that men fear the unknown more than the supernatural. If we can reach the canyon, they will not follow." Clara looked toward the distant mountains, then back at the dust cloud growing larger behind them. "Then we go to the Forbidden Canyon." Nahuel searched her face. "You understand what I am telling you. We will be entering a place that my own people consider taboo. If the stories are true, then we'll face whatever spirits live there," Clara interrupted. "But if we stay here, we'll definitely face those bounty hunters. And somehow I think angry spirits might be preferable to men who murder 17-year-old girls for sport." For a moment, Nahuel just stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled a real smile that transformed his entire face and made Clara's heart skip a beat. "You continually surprise me, just Clara." "Good," she said, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her like that. "I'd hate to be predictable." They remounted and changed direction, heading toward a gap in the rocky hills that was barely visible from their current position. The going became more treacherous as they climbed, with loose rocks and narrow passages that forced them to dismount and lead the horse on foot. Clara's ankle protested with every step, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with Nahuel. She could hear the sounds of pursuit growing closer, the distant shouts of men, the clatter of horses' hooves on stone. "There," Nahuel said, pointing toward what looked like a crack in the canyon wall. "The entrance." Clara peered at the narrow opening and felt her stomach lurch. It looked barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, let alone a horse. "Will we fit?" The horse, "No. But there is a ledge partway up the canyon wall. We can leave him there and continue on foot." Clara nodded, though the thought of abandoning their mount made her nervous. The horse had become their lifeline, their means of staying ahead of their pursuers. As they approached the entrance to the Forbidden Canyon, Clara could see why Nahuel's people might consider it cursed. The rocks were a strange reddish-black color, almost like dried blood, and they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Even the air felt different here, heavier, charged with some indefinable energy that made the hair on Clara's arms stand up. "Are you certain about this?" she asked as Nahuel led the horse up a steep, narrow trail carved into the canyon wall. "No," he admitted, "but certainty is a luxury we cannot afford." The ledge, when they reached it, was larger than it had appeared from below, a natural shelf of rock, hidden from view by an overhang. There was even a small seep of water trickling down the canyon wall, creating a tiny pool that would keep the horse alive while they were gone. "He will wait?" Clara asked as Nahuel removed their few supplies from the horse's back. "He is Apache trained. He will wait." Nahuel ran his hand along the horse's neck in a gesture that was both affectionate and sad. "Unless something happens to us, then he will find his way home." The finality in his voice made Clara shiver. "Nothing's going to happen to us." "Perhaps not, but it is better to be prepared." They left the horse and continued deeper into the canyon on foot. The passage was even narrower than Clara had feared, forcing them to move single file, with their shoulders brushing the walls on either side. The strange black rock was smooth to the touch, almost glassy, and it seemed to pulse with a heat that had nothing to do with the desert sun. "What is this place?" Clara whispered, though she wasn't sure why she felt compelled to lower her voice. "Very old," Nahuel replied, his own voice subdued. "Older than my people, older than the stories we tell. Some say it was made by the first spirits before humans walked the earth." As they moved deeper into the canyon, Clara began to understand why it might be considered cursed. The walls rose higher and higher on either side, blocking out most of the sky and creating a perpetual twilight. Strange rock formations jutted from the walls like grasping fingers, and the echo of their footsteps seemed to linger longer than it should. But it was the silence that was most unsettling. In the desert, there was always some sound wind through rock, the scurry of small animals, the distant cry of birds. Here there was nothing but the soft whisper of their breathing and the occasional drip of water from unseen springs. "How far does it go?" Clara asked. "No one knows. The stories say it leads to the underworld, where the spirits of the dead make their homes." Clara was about to respond when they heard the sound of voices echoing from the canyon entrance behind them. "The tracks lead right to the opening." "Well, what are you waiting for? Go in after them." "I ain't going in there, and neither are you, if you got any sense. That's Apache devil ground." "Devil ground or not, that woman's worth $5,000. You want to explain to the boss why we turned back, because of some Indian superstition?" Clara pressed herself against the canyon wall, her heart hammering in her chest. Beside her, Nahuel had gone completely still, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. $5,000, Clara whispered on. Nahuel's jaw tightened. More than I thought. Someone wants you very badly. The voices continued to argue at the canyon entrance, some of the men clearly reluctant to follow them into the forbidden canyon. Clara found herself hoping that superstition would win out over greed. "All right, listen up," came a new voice, deeper, more authoritative. "Johnson, take 3 men and circle around to the other side of this canyon system. If there's another way out, we'll catch them there. The rest of us are going in after them." "Boss, I don't pay you to think, I pay you to follow orders. Now move." Clara's heart sank. They were coming, and there was nowhere to run except deeper into the mysterious canyon. Nahuel touched her arm. "Come, we must move quickly now." They hurried through the narrow passage as fast as they dared, the sound of pursuit growing closer behind them. The canyon began to widen, gradually opening into a series of chambers and passages that branched off in multiple directions. "Which way?" Clara asked. Nahuel paused, studying the options. "I do not know. No one has mapped this place." "Then we guess." They chose the passage that angled upward, hoping it might lead to another exit. As they climbed, Clara noticed that the walls were beginning to show signs of human habitation, or at least something that might once have been human. Carved symbols covered the rock surfaces, depicting strange figures and scenes that seemed to tell a story she couldn't understand. "What do these mean?" she asked, running her fingers over one of the carvings. Nahuel studied the symbols, his expression troubled. "I have seen similar markings in other sacred places. They speak of the old times before the Great Dying, when my people first came to this land." The Great Dying. A time of plague and war that nearly destroyed all the peoples of this region. Only a few survived, and they changed. There was something in his voice that made Clara look at him sharply. "Changed how?" Before Nahuel could answer, they heard the echo of boots on stone from somewhere behind them. Their pursuers had entered the canyon. "We must keep moving," Nahuel said. They climbed higher, following the winding passage as it led them deeper into the heart of the mountain. The air grew cooler, and Clara could smell water somewhere ahead. After what felt like hours of climbing, they emerged into a vast circular chamber lit by shafts of sunlight streaming down from openings in the ceiling far above. Clara gasped. The chamber was enormous, easily large enough to hold a cathedral, and it was filled with the most beautiful and terrifying sight she had ever seen. The walls were covered with carvings and paintings that seemed to move in the shifting light. Figures danced and hunted and died in endless cycles, their eyes seeming to follow Clara as she moved. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid crystal fed by a waterfall that tumbled down from one of the ceiling openings. But it was the bones that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. Human bones were arranged in careful patterns around the pool, not scattered or broken, but placed with deliberate artistry. Skulls formed spirals and geometric designs, while longer bones created intricate frameworks that seemed to serve some ceremonial purpose. "My God," Clara whispered. "Not your God," Nahuel said quietly. "This is a place of the old spirits, the ones who ruled before any human god was dreamed. Are those the bones of my ancestors, the ones who came here to die when the great sickness took them? They arranged themselves thus so that their spirits could guard this place for all eternity." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air of the chamber. Guard it from what? From those who would disturb the balance between the worlds, from those who would take what does not belong to them. The sound of voices echoed from the passage they had just left, much closer now. Clara looked around the chamber, desperately searching for another way out. There, Nahuel pointed to a narrow opening on the far side of the pool. "But we must cross the water. Is that safe?" "Nothing about this place is safe, but it is our only choice." They moved carefully around the edge of the pool, trying not to disturb the intricate bone arrangements. Clara found herself holding her breath as if the slightest sound might awaken something that was better left sleeping. Halfway around the pool, they heard the bounty hunters enter the chamber behind them. "Jesus Christ," one of them breathed. "What is this place? Told you we shouldn't have come in here," another muttered. "Shut up and find them," the leader barked, but even his voice had lost some of its authority. "They've got to be here somewhere." Clara and Nahuel froze, pressed against the far wall of the chamber. They were completely exposed, with nowhere to hide except Nahuel pulled Clara down behind one of the larger bone formations, a spiral of skulls that rose nearly to her waist. They crouched there, barely breathing, as the bounty hunters spread out to search the chamber. "Look at all this," one of them said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and revulsion. "Must be hundreds of skeletons." "Don't touch anything," the leader warned. "We're here for the woman, not to disturb any Indian burial ground." "Too late for that, boss. Just being here is disturbing it." Clara felt Nahuel tense beside her. She looked at his face and saw something there that frightened her, a wildness, a connection to this ancient place that went deeper than mere respect for the dead. One of the bounty hunters was approaching their hiding place, his rifle held ready. Clara pressed herself lower behind the skulls, acutely aware that any moment he might see them. That's when the first skull moved. Clara bit back a scream as the skull nearest to her slowly turned to face the approaching man. Its empty eye sockets seemed to fix on him with malevolent intelligence, and its jaw moved as if trying to speak words that had been forgotten for centuries. The bounty hunter saw it too. He stopped dead in his tracks, his face going white with terror. "Boss," he called, his voice shaking. "Boss, we need to get out of here, now." "What are you talking about?" "The skulls. They're moving." "Don't be ridiculous. Skulls don't move." But even as the leader spoke, more of the bone arrangements began to shift and change. Ribs rattled against each other, finger bones drummed against the stone floor, and throughout the chamber a low humming sound began to build, as if hundreds of voices were trying to remember how to sing. "Mother of God," one of the bounty hunters whispered, "this place is haunted." "There's no such thing as ghosts," the leader said, but his voice lacked conviction. Clara felt Nahuel's hand close over hers, warm and solid and reassuring. He leaned close to her ear. "When I tell you to run," he whispered, "run for the passage. Do not look back." "What are you going to do? What must be done?" Before Clara could ask what he meant, Nahuel stood up from behind their hiding place. The bounty hunters immediately spotted him, raising their rifles with shouts of triumph. There he is!" But as they took aim, Nahuel began to speak in a language Clara had never heard before, fluid, musical, ancient. His voice seemed to harmonize with the humming of the bones, and the effect was immediate and terrifying. The chamber erupted into chaos. Every bone in the place began to move, not randomly, but with purpose and coordination. Skulls rolled toward the bounty hunters like bowling balls, ribs formed writhing serpents that wrapped around their legs, and finger bones scuttled across the floor like spiders. The men screamed and fired their rifles wildly, but bullets couldn't stop what was happening. The bones seemed to be animated by some force that was beyond the physical world, spirits or ancient magic, or simply the collective will of a people who had been disturbed in their eternal rest. "Run," Nahuel commanded, and Clara ran. She sprinted around the pool toward the far passage, her injured ankle screaming with every step. Behind her she could hear the bounty hunters shouting and cursing as they fought against an enemy that couldn't be killed. Nahuel caught up with her at the passage entrance, grabbing her hand and pulling her into the narrow tunnel beyond. They ran together through the darkness, guided only by the faint light that filtered down from cracks in the ceiling above. The sounds of chaos faded behind them, replaced by the thunderous beating of Clara's heart and the ragged gasps of her breathing. They ran until her legs gave out, completely collapsing together against the tunnel wall in a tangle of limbs and exhaustion. "What was that?" Clara gasped when she could finally speak. "What did you do back there?" "I spoke the old language," Nahuel said, his own breathing labored. "The words of power that my grandfather taught me, words that should never be spoken in the presence of the unworthy. But the bones, They actually moved. How is that possible? Nahuel looked at her with eyes that seemed older than his years. There are forces in this world that your people do not understand. Powers that existed long before your God was conceived. In places like this where the barrier between worlds is thin, those forces can still be awakened. Clara stared at him, trying to process what she had witnessed. Are you saying you're some kind of shaman medicine man? I am saying that I am Apache, and the Apache remember things that others have forgotten. They sat in silence for a while, listening for any sound of pursuit. But the tunnel behind them remained quiet. Either the bounty hunters had been dealt with permanently, or they had fled the cursed chamber in terror. Will they follow us now? Clara asked. No, they will tell stories of what they saw, but no one will believe them, and they will never return to this place. Good. Clara leaned back against the tunnel wall, suddenly exhausted. Where are we now? Safe for the moment. This tunnel leads to the other side of the mountain. We can rest here until dark, then continue our journey. Clara closed her eyes, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. 3 days ago, she had been a sheltered debutante whose greatest concern was choosing the right dress for dinner. Now she was hiding in a haunted Apache burial ground with a man who could apparently speak to the dead. Nahuel, yes. When this is over, when we're safe, will you teach me the old language, the stories, the things your grandfather taught you? He was quiet for so long that Clara thought he hadn't heard her. When she opened her eyes, she found him staring at her with an expression of wonder. Why would you want to learn such things? Because they're part of who you are, and I want to understand who you are. Something shifted in his face, surprise giving way to something deeper, more complex. You realize what you are saying. Learning the old ways would bind you to my people, to this land. You could never go back to your former life. Clara thought about that. Really considered it. Could she live forever as an outsider, cut off from everything familiar? Could she find happiness in a world so different from the one she had known? Then she thought about the alternative, returning to Boston, to arranged marriages and empty drawing room conversations, to a life where her only value was as a beautiful ornament for some man to possess. I don't want to go back, she said. That life was never really mine anyway. Nahuel reached out and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. You are certain once you begin down this path, there is no returning. Clara covered his hand with hers, feeling the calluses and scars that spoke of a life lived close to danger and beauty and truth. I'm certain. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the dim light of the tunnel. Then Nahuel leaned forward and kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste pecks on the cheek that Clara had received from proper gentlemen at society functions. This kiss was fire and hunger and desperate need, a claiming that went beyond mere physical desire. When they finally broke apart, Clara felt as if something fundamental had changed in the world around them. We should rest, Nahuel said, his voice rougher than usual. Clara nodded, though she doubted she would be able to sleep. Too much had happened, too many impossible things had become real. But as she settled against Nahuel's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, she found that exhaustion was stronger than adrenaline. Her last conscious thought was that she had never felt safer than she did in this dark tunnel, in the arms of a man her people would call a savage, surrounded by ancient powers that defied all rational explanation. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore was exactly where she belonged. Clara woke to the sound of wind whistling through stone, her body stiff from sleeping on the rocky ground. The tunnel was darker now, with only the faintest gray light filtering down from somewhere far above. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was or why her ankle throbbed with such insistent pain. Then it all came rushing back: the train wreck, the bounty hunters, the impossible scene in the bone chamber. Nahuel was already awake, sitting motionless in the darkness with his back against the tunnel wall. Even in the dim light, Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his knife. What is it? She whispered. Listen. Clara strained her ears, trying to hear whatever had put him on alert. At first, there was only the wind, but gradually she became aware of other sounds. Distant voices, the clatter of hooves on stone, the faint echo of men calling to each other across the canyon. The bounty hunters, different ones. They have sent word, brought reinforcements. Nahuel's voice was grim. They surround the mountain now, waiting for us to emerge. Clara felt her heart sink. How many? Too many. And they know this country better than I hoped. He stood extending his hand to help her up. We cannot wait for darkness. We must move now while we still can. They gathered their few possessions and began making their way deeper into the tunnel system. The passage sloped downward now, leading them into the very heart of the mountain. The air grew cooler and damper, carrying the scent of deep water and growing things. Where does this lead? Clara asked as they felt their way through the darkness. I do not know, but all water flows somewhere, and where there is water, there is life. They walked in silence for what felt like hours, guided only by the subtle current of air that suggested an opening somewhere ahead. Clara's ankle had swollen during their rest, making each step an exercise in stubborn determination. But she bit back her complaints, knowing that Nahuel was pushing himself just as hard. The tunnel began to widen gradually, and Clara noticed that the walls were becoming smoother, as if worn by countless years of flowing water. Then she heard it, the distant sound of running water echoing from somewhere ahead. A river, Nahuel said with satisfaction. I thought I smelled it. They emerged from the tunnel onto a narrow ledge overlooking an underground river that flowed through a cavern so vast its ceiling was lost in darkness. Phosphorescent moss clung to the walls, providing just enough light to reveal the swift-moving water below and the rocky shore on the far side. How deep do you think it is? Clara asked, studying the dark water. Deep enough to drown in if we are not careful. Nahuel was already examining the ledge, looking for a way down. But it flows east toward the settlements. If we can follow it, we can get away from the mountain without showing ourselves on the surface. He found a narrow path carved into the rock face, whether by nature or ancient hands. Clara couldn't tell. They made their way down carefully, Clara's heart hammering every time loose stones skittered away beneath her feet. At the water's edge, Nahuel began gathering pieces of driftwood that had collected against the rocky shore. We need a raft. The current is too strong to swim against, and we do not know how far this river runs underground. Do you know how to build a raft? I know how to stay alive. The rest I will learn as I go. Clara found herself smiling despite their dire circumstances. You're very confident for someone who's making this up as he goes along. Confidence is sometimes the only thing that stands between survival and death. Nahuel tested a piece of wood for soundness, then began lashing it to another with strips torn from his shirt. Besides, what choice do we have? Clara began gathering more wood, trying to select pieces that looked sturdy enough to support their weight. How did you learn to speak that language back in the bone chamber, the one that made the spirits move? Nahuel's hands paused in their work. My grandfather was a medicine man among our people. When I was young, he saw something in me, a connection to the old ways that others had lost. He taught me the sacred words, the rituals that bind the living world to the spirit world. And your people were all right with that, a warrior who could also speak to spirits. Some were, others feared what they did not understand. Nahuel resumed his lashing, his movements quick and efficient. There are those who believe that mixing the warrior's path with the medicine man's path creates something dangerous, neither fully one thing nor the other. Clara sensed there was more to the story, but before she could ask, the sound of voices echoed down from somewhere high above them. The bounty hunters had found the tunnel entrance. How long before they reach us? She asked. Not long enough. Nahuel tested their makeshift raft, pushing it partway into the water. It bobbed uncertainly but seemed to hold together. It will have to do. They pushed off from the shore, Clara's stomach lurching as the current immediately caught them and swept them downstream. The raft spun and bucked like a living thing, spray soaking them both as they fought to maintain their balance. Nahuel knelt at the back of the raft, using a long piece of driftwood as a steering pole. His movements were sure and economical, reading the current like a book written in water and stone. "How do you know how to do this?" Clara called over the rush of water. "Rivers are like enemies. They have patterns, weaknesses. Learn to read them, and you can use their strength against them." The underground river carried them through a series of chambers, each one different from the last. Some were narrow and low, forcing them to duck as the raft shot through like a bullet. Others opened into vast cathedral spaces, where their voices echoed like whispers of the gods. In one chamber, Clara gasped as she saw paintings on the walls, not crude cave drawings, but sophisticated artwork that depicted scenes of hunting, dancing, and rituals she couldn't begin to understand. The figures seemed to move in the flickering light cast by the phosphorescent moss, as if the ancient artists had somehow captured not just images, but the very essence of life itself. "Who made these?" she asked. "The same people who built the bone chamber, the ancestors who came before, who knew things that have been forgotten." Nahuel's voice carried a note of reverence. "They say these caves run beneath the entire mountain range, connecting sacred sites that are hundreds of miles apart. A whole underground world. Yes, hidden from those who would destroy what they do not understand." The current began to slow as they entered a wider section of the river, and Clara could see natural light filtering down from cracks in the ceiling far above. They were getting closer to the surface, closer to the world of sun and sky, and the men who hunted them. "Nahuel," she said suddenly, "what happened to your family? Besides your sister, I mean." His steering pole bit into the water with more force than necessary. "Dead. All of them." "How?" "The same way most Apache families die these days. Soldiers came to our camp one winter while the men were away hunting. They said we were harboring raiders, that we had to be relocated to the reservation." Nahuel's voice was flat, emotionless. "My mother told them we were peaceful people, that we had never raided anyone. The lieutenant said it didn't matter, an Apache was an Apache." Clara felt sick. What did they do? What they always do. They herded the women and children into the largest lodge and set it on fire. Those who tried to run were shot down like animals. The steering pole trembled in Nahuel's hands. "I was 14. I watched from the ridge where I had been gathering wood. I watched my mother, my grandmother, my little brothers burn to death, and I could do nothing to stop it. My God." When the warriors returned and found what had been done, some wanted immediate revenge. Others counseled patience, said that more violence would only bring more soldiers down on the surviving bands. Nahuel's laugh was bitter. "I chose revenge. I spent the next 8 years learning every way there is to kill a man, and I used that knowledge on every blue coat I could find." Clara absorbed this in silence, trying to reconcile the gentle man who had saved her life with the killer he was describing. And then I realized that revenge is like drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die. It was consuming me, turning me into something my mother would not have recognized. The raft drifted toward a sandy beach, and Nahuel used his pole to guide them to shore. So I stopped killing soldiers and started hunting the men who profit from our suffering, the ones who sell weapons to both sides, who buy scalps, regardless of whose head they came from. Like the bounty hunters. Like the bounty hunters. Nahuel stepped out of the raft and pulled it up onto the beach. "But now I have something more important than revenge." "What's that?" He turned to look at her, and Clara felt her breath catch at the intensity in his dark eyes. "I have something to protect instead of something to avenge." Before Clara could respond to that, they heard voices echoing from the tunnel behind them, distant but getting closer. Their pursuers had followed them through the underground river system. "They're persistent," Clara said, accepting Nahuel's help to climb out of the raft. $5,000 buys a lot of persistence. Nahuel was already scanning their surroundings, looking for the best route of escape. They were in a natural grotto where the underground river emerged into daylight before continuing its journey toward the desert floor below. Steep cliffs rose on three sides, but to the east, Clara could see a narrow trail that switchbacked up toward a ridgeline. "Can we climb that? We have to. It is our only way out." They began the ascent immediately, Clara biting back gasps of pain as her injured ankle protested every step. The trail was treacherous, little more than a deer path carved into the cliff face, with loose stones that threatened to send them tumbling back down into the grotto. Halfway up, they heard shouts from below. The bounty hunters had reached the underground river. "There are fresh tracks on the beach. How many rafts can they build from that driftwood?" "Doesn't matter. Start building. Johnson, take 2 men and see if you can find another way around these cliffs." Clara's heart sank. Even if they reached the top of the ridge, they would still be trapped between the men following them up the cliff and the others who were circling around to cut off their escape. "Nahuel, they're going to surround us." "I know." His voice was calm, but Clara could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "How is your ankle?" "It hurts, but I can keep going." "Good, because we are going to need to move very fast once we reach the top." They climbed in silence for the next hour, pushing themselves to their limits as the sound of pursuit grew steadily closer behind them. When they finally hauled themselves over the edge of the cliff, onto the ridge, Clara collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The view from the ridge was spectacular, endless miles of desert and mountains, stretching away in every direction, painted in shades of gold and crimson by the late afternoon sun. Under other circumstances, Clara would have been awed by the beauty of it. Right now, all she could think about was how exposed they were on this bare ridgeline. Nahuel was studying the terrain with the practiced eye of a warrior. "There," he said, pointing toward a series of rocky outcroppings about half a mile to the south. "We can reach cover before they get up here, but we have to move now." They set off across the ridge at a pace that was just short of a run, Clara gritting her teeth against the pain that shot up her leg with every step. Behind them, she could hear the voices of the bounty hunters getting closer as they climbed the final stretch of the cliff trail. The rocky outcroppings Nahuel had spotted turned out to be the remains of an ancient lava flow, creating a maze of natural fortifications and hiding places. They ducked into a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders just as the first bounty hunters appeared on the ridge behind them. "Damn it, where did they go? Tracks lead this way, but then they just disappear." Nobody just disappears. Spread out and search every rock, every cave, every shadow big enough to hide a mouse. Clara pressed herself deeper into the crevice, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the bounty hunters would hear it. Beside her, Nahuel had gone completely still, every muscle tensed and ready for action. They waited in silence as booted feet tramped past their hiding place, sometimes coming close enough that Clara could have reached out and touched them. The search seemed to go on forever, voices calling back and forth as the men methodically checked every possible hiding spot. "Boss, we're losing the light. Maybe they made it past us somehow." "They didn't make it past us. They're here somewhere and we're going to find them." "What if they doubled back, went down the way we came up?" A long pause, then, "Johnson, take half the men and go back down. Set up a watch on the grotto. If they try to go back that way, we'll have them. The rest of us will make camp here and continue the search at first light." Clara's heart sank. They were going to be trapped here all night with armed men camped practically on top of them. As darkness fell over the ridge, Clara and Nahuel remained motionless in their rocky hiding place. The bounty hunters had indeed made camp nearby, close enough that they could hear every word of conversation, smell the smoke from their cooking fire. "You think they're really up here, boss?" one of the men asked. "I think that woman is worth more money than any of us has ever seen, and I'm not going home empty-handed," came the reply. "Besides, where else could they have gone? We've got men watching every trail off this mountain." "Maybe they're dead, fell off a cliff, or got ate by something." Then we bring back the bodies and collect the reward for trying." Clara shivered and Nahuel's arm tightened around her shoulders. They had been pressed together in the narrow crevice for hours now, and Clara was acutely aware of his warmth, his strength, the steady rhythm of his breathing. Under other circumstances, being this close to him would have been distracting for entirely different reasons. "Nahuel," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Yes, if they catch us, they will not catch us. But if they do, they will not." His voice was firm, final. "I did not bring you this far to lose you now." Something in the way he said it made Clara turn to look at him in the darkness. "Is that what this is to you? A responsibility, something you have to see through because you saved my life?" She felt rather than saw him shake his head. "No, Clara, it stopped being about responsibility the moment you chose to trust me instead of fear me." "Then what is it about?" For a long moment he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, vulnerable, in a way she had never heard before. "It is about the fact that when I look at you, I see a future I never thought possible. A life that could be about more than just survival and revenge." Clara felt her breath catch. "Nahuel, I know it is impossible. I know that whatever is between us can only lead to pain for both of us. You are white, I am Apache. Your people will never accept me, and many of mine will never accept you." His hand found hers in the darkness, fingers intertwining. "But for the first time since my family died, I have something to live for instead of something to die for." Clara squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the intensity of what she was feeling. 3 days ago, she had never even seen this man. Now she couldn't imagine a life without him. "It doesn't have to be impossible," she whispered. "Mar, doesn't it? What kind of life could we have together, always running, always hiding, never belonging anywhere?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, "but it would be our life, our choice. Isn't that worth something?" Before Nahuel could answer, they heard new voices approaching the bounty hunters' camp. Any sign of them? Nothing. It's like they vanished into thin air. Well, they didn't. Nobody vanishes. This was a new voice, one that made Nahuel's entire body go rigid with tension. "But maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong." "What do you mean, Garrett?" Clara felt Nahuel's sharp intake of breath at the name. She looked at him questioningly, but his attention was completely focused on the conversation outside their hiding place. "I mean, maybe we're not dealing with an ordinary kidnapping here. Maybe we're dealing with someone who knows these mountains better than we do." "You think she's got help? Another survivor from the train?" "I think she's got Apache help." The man called Garrett spat into the fire, making it hiss. "I've been tracking Apache for 15 years, and this has all the hallmarks of their work. The way they disappeared from the train wreck, the way they've stayed ahead of us through country that would kill most white men. This isn't luck. This is skill." "You saying an Apache took the woman?" "I'm saying an Apache saved the woman. Question is why?" Clara felt Nahuel's hand tighten on hers, and she could sense the battle raging inside him. There was something about this Garrett that affected him deeply, something that went beyond mere professional concern. "Does it matter why?" one of the other bounty hunters asked. "Apache or not, they're still just two people against all of us." "It matters," Garrett said, "because if I'm right about who we're dealing with, we're not hunting some random savage. We're hunting Nahuel." The name hung in the air like a curse, and Clara heard several of the bounty hunters mutter oaths or prayers. "The jaguar. You sure about that, Garrett? The signs are all here. The way he's moved through this country, the way he stayed ahead of us, the fact that he chose to save a white woman instead of killing her." Garrett's voice carried a mixture of respect and hatred. "Yeah, I'm sure. If it's really him, maybe we should think about calling for reinforcements. The army's been hunting that bastard for years." "The army are fools," Garrett spat. "They hunt him like he's just another renegade, another savage to be run down and destroyed. But Nahuel isn't just a warrior, he's a ghost story, a nightmare that parents use to frighten children into behaving." Clara turned to stare at Nahuel in the darkness, seeing him with new eyes. She had known he was dangerous, had seen evidence of his skills, but she was beginning to understand that the man she had fallen in love with was a legend among his enemies. "So what do we do?" one of the bounty hunters asked. "We do what the army hasn't been able to do for 8 years, Garrett replied. "We think like him instead of trying to overpower him. He's got the woman, which means he's not just trying to survive anymore, he's trying to protect something. That makes him vulnerable in ways he's never been before." Clara felt sick as she realized what the man was suggesting. "You want to use her as bait. I want to make him choose between his own life and hers. Force him into a situation where he can't just disappear into the desert like smoke." Garrett's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had finally found his opponent's weakness. "Set up an ambush, make sure he knows she'll die if he doesn't come for her, and then kill him when he does. And if he doesn't come, if he just abandons her, he won't. See, that's the thing about legends, they always have to live up to their own mythology. Nahuel has spent 8 years building a reputation as the ghost who strikes without warning and disappears without a trace. But ghosts don't have weaknesses, don't have things they care about protecting. The moment he chose to save this woman, he stopped being a ghost and became a man again." Clara felt Nahuel's body go completely rigid beside her, and she knew that Garrett's words had found their target. Everything the bounty hunter had said was true. By saving her, by choosing to protect her, Nahuel had given his enemies exactly the leverage they needed to destroy him. "So we grab the woman and wait for him to come after her." "Exactly. But we have to be smart about it. He's still Nahuel, still the most dangerous man in the territory. We get one chance at this, and if we miss it, he'll kill us all." The bounty hunters continued planning their trap, their voices growing more confident as they convinced themselves that they had finally found a way to capture their legendary prey. Clara listened with growing horror, realizing that she had become not just the object of their hunt, but the weapon they intended to use against the man she loved. When the voices finally died down and the bounty hunters settled in for the night, Clara turned to Nahuel in the darkness. "We have to leave," she whispered. "We have to get away from here before they can put their plan into action." "Where would we go? They have men on every trail, every water source, and your ankle—" "My ankle doesn't matter, don't you see? As long as I'm with you, I'm a danger to you. They're right. You can't be the ghost you were before, not while you're protecting me." "Clara, maybe you should leave me, find somewhere safe to hide me, and then disappear back into the desert. Without me to worry about, you could evade them forever." Even in the darkness, she could feel the intensity of his stare. "Is that what you want? To be hidden away somewhere while I go back to being a killer in the wilderness? I want you to live, and as long as you're with me, you feel you're vulnerable in ways you've never been before." "Yes," Nahuel said simply. "I am. Then, and I would rather be vulnerable with you than invulnerable without you." The quiet certainty in his voice silenced her protests. They lay together in the narrow crevice, listening to the sounds of their enemies sleeping nearby, each lost in their own thoughts about the impossible situation they faced. "Nahuel," Clara whispered finally, "who is Garrett?" She felt him tense again at the name. "Lieutenant Marcus Garrett, the man who led the raid on my village, the man who gave the order to burn the lodge with my family inside." Clara's blood turned to ice. "He's here, the man who killed your family, is leading the hunt for us. It seems the spirits have a sense of irony. This isn't irony, this is justice. This is your chance to what? Kill him." Nahuel's voice was bitter. "I have had a dozen chances to kill Marcus Garrett over the years. He is not a hard man to find. He makes sure everyone knows where he is and what he has done. But killing him will not bring back my family, and it will not heal the wound in my heart. But surely you want revenge." "I wanted revenge for 8 years. It consumed me, drove me, gave me purpose when I had nothing else to live for." His hand found hers again. "But revenge is a cold thing, Clara. It burns without giving warmth, destroys without creating. I do not want to be that man anymore." Clara struggled to understand. "So you're just going to let him get away with what he did? I am going to choose to live for the future instead of dying for the past." Nahuel's voice was firm. "Garrett will face his own judgment eventually, from his own conscience, from his own God, from the weight of all the innocent blood on his hands. But that judgment will not come from me." They fell silent again, and Clara found herself marveling at the strength it must take to choose forgiveness over vengeance. She wasn't sure she could do the same in his position. As the night wore on, they took turns sleeping and keeping watch, their bodies pressed together for warmth in the narrow space. During Clara's watch, she found herself studying Nahuel's face in the faint starlight that filtered down between the rocks. Even in sleep, there was something untamed about him, something that belonged to the wild places of the world. She thought about what her life had been before meeting him, the endless round of social obligations, the careful adherence to rules and expectations that she had never questioned. It seemed like someone else's life now, a story she had heard but never actually lived. Whatever happened in the morning, whatever dangers they faced, she knew she could never go back to being that person. Nahuel had awakened something in her that had been sleeping all her life, a hunger for genuine experience, for choices that mattered, for a love that was real instead of merely convenient. When dawn began to lighten the sky above their hiding place, they heard the bounty hunters stirring in their camp. Soon the hunt would resume, and this time their pursuers would know exactly who they were dealing with. Clara gently shook Nahuel awake, and he came to instant alertness, his hand moving automatically to his knife before he recognized her. "Time to go," he asked quietly. "Past time." They slipped out of their hiding place and made their way carefully through the maze of rocks, moving away from the bounty hunters' camp. The desert was awakening around them, birds calling from hidden perches, small animals scurrying through the brush, the distant cry of a hawk circling high overhead. It should have been beautiful, Clara thought. Under other circumstances, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson would have taken her breath away. Instead, all she could think about was the armed men who were already beginning to search for them, spreading out across the ridge like hounds on a scent. They had perhaps an hour's head start before their absence was discovered. After that, it would be a race, their knowledge of the country and their desperation against the bounty hunters' numbers and resources. "Where do we go now?" Clara asked as they picked their way down the far side of the ridge. "South," Nahuel replied, "toward the border. If we can reach Mexico, the bounty hunters cannot follow." "How far?" "2 days, maybe 3, if we can stay ahead of them that long." Clara looked back at the ridge they had just left, already seeing dust clouds in the distance that marked the movement of mounted men. "And if we can't?" Nahuel followed her gaze, his expression grim. "Then we make our stand somewhere that gives us the best chance of taking some of them with us." The matter-of-fact way he said it chilled Clara more than any dramatic declaration could have. This was what his life had been for 8 years, a constant calculation of odds, a perpetual readiness for death. "There has to be another way," she said. "Perhaps, but hope for the best while preparing for the worst. That is how one survives in this country." They continued their descent, moving as quickly as Clara's injured ankle would allow. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were already beginning, shouts of discovery, as the bounty hunters found their empty hiding place, the neighing of horses being saddled, the bark of orders as Garrett organized his men for the chase. The hunt was on, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this time their legendary luck was about to run out. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Clara and Nahuel descended into a maze of red rock canyons, their pursuers' voices echoing off the stone walls behind them like the baying of hunting hounds. Clara's ankle screamed with each jarring step. but she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant capture or death. "This way," Nahuel said, guiding her toward a narrow gap between two towering rock formations. "The canyon splits ahead. If we can reach it before they see which path we take." A rifle shot cracked through the desert air, the bullet striking the rock face inches from Clara's head and showering them both with stone fragments. She gasped and stumbled, but Nahuel's strong arm caught her before she could fall. "They're closer than I thought," he said grimly. "Run." They sprinted through the gap just as more shots rang out behind them. Clara could hear Garrett's voice booming across the canyon, coordinating his men with military precision. "Thompson, take your squad up the north rim. Martinez, circle around to the south. Don't let them reach the fork." The canyon ahead split into 3 different passages, each one disappearing into the red rock maze. Nahuel paused for only a moment, his keen eyes reading signs that Clara couldn't even see, before pulling her toward the leftmost passage. "Why this one?" she gasped as they ran. "Water," he replied tersely. "I can smell it, and where there is water, there might be people." Clara finished understanding. If they could reach some settlement, some place with witnesses, the bounty hunters might be forced to back off. But as they plunged deeper into the narrow canyon, Clara realized that Nahuel's choice had been more strategic than she'd initially understood. The passage was barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, and it twisted and turned like a snake, providing natural cover and forcing any pursuers to come at them, single file. Behind them, the sound of pursuit continued. Boots on stone shouted orders, the occasional curse as someone slipped on loose rock, but the echoing walls made it impossible to tell exactly how close their enemies were. "They're splitting up," Clara observed, hearing voices from multiple directions now. "Good. Divided forces are weaker forces." Nahuel's breathing was controlled despite their pace, but it also means they are trying to surround us. They rounded a sharp bend in the canyon and suddenly emerged into brilliant sunlight. Before them stretched a hidden valley, green with grassland and dotted with groves of cottonwood trees. A crystal-clear stream meandered through the center, fed by a waterfall that cascaded down from the canyon rim high above. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed momentarily, forgetting their danger. "And exposed," Nahuel added, scanning the valley's perimeter. "We cannot cross in daylight without being seen." As if to prove his point, a rifle shot echoed from the canyon mouth behind them, followed by Garrett's triumphant shout. "There, I can see them. They're trapped in the valley." Clara's heart sank as she looked around the hidden oasis. The valley was indeed beautiful, but it was also a natural trap. The only ways out were the canyon they had just exited and 2 other narrow passes on the far side, all of which could easily be watched by men with rifles. "What do we do?" she asked. Nahuel was already moving, pulling her toward the nearest grove of cottonwoods. "We make them come to us on our terms." They reached the trees just as the first bounty hunters appeared at the canyon mouth. Clara pressed herself against the thick trunk of a cottonwood, her heart hammering as she watched their enemies spread out along the valley's edge. Garrett appeared a moment later, his weathered face split by a predatory grin. Even at this distance, Clara could see the satisfaction in his posture as he surveyed what he clearly believed was his victory. "Well, well," his voice carried clearly across the valley. "The famous Nahuel cornered at last, like any other animal." Clara felt Nahuel tense beside her, but he remained silent. "I know you can hear me," Garrett continued, raising his voice. "You might as well come out. My men have all 3 exits covered, and there's nowhere left to run." Still, Nahuel said nothing, but Clara could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Of course, we could always do this the hard way," Garrett called. "Burn you out, maybe. This valley would make a fine funeral pyre for the last free Apache in the territory." Clara saw Nahuel's hand move to his knife, and she knew that the bounty hunter's taunts were having their intended effect. She reached out and touched his arm, shaking her head when he looked at her. "He's trying to make you angry," she whispered, "trying to make you do something stupid." "I know what he is doing," Nahuel's voice was barely controlled fury, but knowing and resisting are different things. Garrett was still talking, his voice echoing off the valley walls. You know, Nahuel, I've been thinking about that night we first met. Your village, 8 years ago. I still remember the way your mother screamed when the flames reached her. This time Clara had to physically restrain Nahuel as he started to rise from their hiding place. His dark eyes blazed with a rage so pure it was almost frightening. Easy, she whispered urgently. That's exactly what he wants. The moment you show yourself, they'll cut you down. She died calling my name. Garrett continued, his voice carrying false sympathy, calling for her son to save her. But where were you, Nahuel? Off playing in the woods while your family burned. Stop listening to him, Clara said, seeing the pain in Nahuel's eyes. He's just trying to hurt you. The baby was the worst, though, Garrett went on relentlessly. Little thing couldn't have been more than 2 years old. Took a long time to stop crying. Something snapped in Nahuel's eyes, and Clara knew that no amount of reasoning was going to hold him back anymore. The rage that he had carried for 8 years was finally breaking free, and Garrett's calculated cruelty had achieved its purpose. I have to end this, Nahuel said, his voice deadly calm. I have to kill him. No, you don't. We can find another way. There is no other way. Nahuel turned to look at her, and Clara was shocked by the transformation in his face. The gentle man who had saved her life was gone, replaced by something primal and terrible. This ends here, one way or another. If you go out there, you'll die. That's what he wants, to make you so angry that you'll throw your life away for revenge. Perhaps, but some things are worth dying for. Clara grabbed his arm as he started to stand. What about me? What happens to me if you die? That stopped him. She saw the conflict in his eyes as duty warred with desire, love battled with hate. Clara, you said you had something to live for instead of something to die for. Was that a lie? No. But then don't let him win. Don't give him what he wants. Clara looked into his eyes, pouring all her love and desperation into her voice. Find another way. Find the way that lets us both survive this. For a long moment Nahuel stared at her, then slowly the rage began to fade from his eyes, replaced by something cooler but no less dangerous. You are right, he said finally. Garrett wants me angry and careless. Instead, I will give him something he does not expect. What? Patience. Nahuel settled back against the tree trunk, his eyes never leaving the bounty hunters who were positioning themselves around the valley. He thinks he has trapped us, but he has also trapped himself. His men cannot wait here forever, and the longer they stay, the more likely it is that someone will come looking for them. But what if no one comes? What if we're really trapped here? Then we wait for darkness and take our chances. Nahuel's voice was calm now, the terrible rage buried beneath layers of tactical thinking. But I do not think it will come to that. As if summoned by his words, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from one of the other canyon passes. Both Clara and Nahuel tensed, expecting more bounty hunters, but the riders who emerged into the valley wore different clothes entirely. They were Mexican vaqueros, a dozen men in wide-brimmed hats and leather chaps, driving a small herd of cattle toward the stream. They stopped abruptly when they saw the armed men positioned around the valley, their leader raising his hand in a gesture that was both greeting and warning. Buenos dias, the vaquero called out in accented English. Is there some problem here, señors? Garrett cursed under his breath, clearly not having expected this complication. He rode forward to meet the newcomers, his smile as false as fool's gold. No problem at all, friend, just tracking some dangerous fugitives through the area. You'd best move your cattle along, this could get ugly. The vaquero leader, a grizzled man with silver threading his black mustache, studied Garrett with suspicious eyes. Fugitives? What have they done? Murder, kidnapping, the usual Apache crimes. Garrett replied dismissively. Nothing that concerns honest ranchers like yourselves. Apache, the vaquero's expression hardened. You hunt Apache in Mexican territory. Clara saw Garrett's confident expression flicker slightly. This isn't Mexican territory. We're still north of the border. Are we? The vaquero pulled out a battered map and studied it deliberately. My map says differently, senor. Says this valley belongs to the Herrera Ranch, which last I checked was in the state of Sonora. Your map is wrong, is it? The vaquero's voice carried a dangerous edge now. Don Herrera will be most interested to learn that American bounty hunters are operating on his land without permission. Clara felt a surge of hope. If they were indeed in Mexico, then Garrett and his men were operating outside their jurisdiction. But she could see from Garrett's face that he wasn't going to let a little thing like international law stop him. Look, friend, Garrett said, his hand moving casually toward his gun. We can do this easy or we can do this hard, but either way, we're finishing our business here. The vaquero leader's own hand dropped to his weapon. I think not, senor. These are Mexican lands and Mexican law applies here. If you have criminals to catch, you will apply to the proper authorities. The proper authorities can go to hell. The tension in the valley ratcheted up another notch as both groups of armed men faced off. Clara could see fingers tightening on rifle triggers, horses shifting nervously as their riders prepared for violence. Nahuel, she whispered, this could be our chance. Or it could get a lot of innocent men killed. But even as he spoke, Clara could see him calculating angles and distances. The vaqueros have no reason to trust us any more than they trust Garrett. Before Clara could respond, one of Garrett's men made the decision for all of them. Whether from nerves or over-eagerness, he fired his rifle into the air apparently as a warning, but the effect was to trigger an explosion of violence that no one could control. The vaqueros responded instantly, drawing their weapons and taking cover behind their horses. Garrett's men opened fire from their positions around the valley rim, and suddenly the peaceful oasis became a battlefield. Now, Nahuel said, grabbing Clara's hand, while they are distracted. They ran from tree to tree using the chaos of the gunfight as cover. Bullets whined through the air above their heads, but most of the combatants were too focused on each other to notice two figures moving through the smoke and confusion. They reached the stream and splashed across the cold water, shocking against Clara's skin. On the far side, another grove of cottonwoods offered temporary shelter, but Clara could see that they were still dangerously exposed. The waterfall, Nahuel said, pointing toward the cascade that fed the stream. There will be caves behind it. They fought their way through the spray and thundering water, Clara gasping as the force of the falls nearly knocked her down. But Nahuel had been right. There was indeed a narrow ledge behind the waterfall, and beyond that a cave that led deeper into the canyon wall. The sound of gunfire was muffled by the water, but Clara could still hear shouts and curses echoing across the valley. Through the shifting curtain of the falls, she caught glimpses of the battle raging outside, men taking cover behind rocks and trees, muzzle flashes lighting up the smoke horses rearing and bolting in terror. How long do you think it will last? She asked. Not long. The vaqueros are outnumbered, and they did not come here expecting a fight. Nahuel was already exploring the cave looking for another way out. But long enough, perhaps. The cave proved to be part of the same network that had brought them to the valley, connecting to passages that led deeper into the mountain. Clara followed Nahuel through winding tunnels lit only by the faint glow of phosphorescent moss, trusting him to find their way in the underground maze. Behind them, the sound of gunfire gradually faded, replaced by the drip of water and the whisper of air moving through stone. They walked for what felt like hours, Clara's ankle throbbing with every step, until finally they emerged into daylight once again. They were on the far side of the mountain now, looking down into a different valley entirely. This one was smaller than the hidden oasis they had fled, nothing more than a narrow canyon with a thin stream running through it. but it was empty of armed men, and right now that was all Clara cared about. "Are we safe?" she asked as they made their way down into the canyon. "For now, but Garrett will not give up easily. When the shooting stops, he will search for our trail." They followed the stream eastward, moving as quickly as Clara's injured ankle would allow. The canyon walls provided some cover, but Clara knew they were still terribly exposed. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Every sound might herald their discovery. It was late afternoon when they heard the hoofbeats. Nahuel immediately pulled Clara into the shelter of a rocky overhang, pressing his finger to his lips for silence. They waited as the sound grew closer, and Clara's heart sank as she recognized the voices of their pursuers. "Tracks lead this way, clear as day," one of the bounty hunters was saying. "How many men did we lose back there?" That was Garrett's voice, tight with anger. 3 dead, 2 wounded, and the Mexicans got away with their cattle. Damn it, this should have been simple. Clara felt Nahuel tense beside her as more riders approached their hiding place. She could see them now through a gap in the rocks. 6 men, all heavily armed, their faces grim with the aftermath of violence. "Boss, maybe we should call this off," one of them suggested. "That woman ain't worth getting killed over." "That woman is worth $5,000, Garrett snapped. "And I'll be damned if I'm going back empty-handed after coming this far." "But if the Mexicans report us, the Mexicans won't report anything. They're smugglers and cattle thieves themselves. The last thing they want is government attention." Garrett reined in his horse directly in front of their hiding place. "Besides, we're close now. I can feel it." Clara held her breath, certain that discovery was inevitable. They were so close she could have reached out and touched Garrett's horse. One wrong move, one unlucky glance, and it would all be over. But the bounty hunters rode past without seeing them, following the stream deeper into the canyon. Clara waited until the sound of hoofbeats had completely faded before daring to breathe again. "They're following our trail," she whispered. "Yes, but tracks can lie if you know how to make them." Nahuel was already moving, leading her out of their hiding place and back toward the stream. "We backtrack now carefully. Make them think we continued east while we actually go west." They spent the next hour carefully obscuring their trail, using every trick Nahuel knew to confuse their pursuers. They walked backward in their own footprints, used rocks to avoid leaving tracks, even waded upstream for a considerable distance to break the trail entirely. By the time they finally stopped to rest, the sun was setting behind the canyon walls, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Clara collapsed against a boulder, exhausted beyond measure. "How much farther to the border?" she asked. "Close now, perhaps 10 miles, no more." Nahuel settled beside her, his own fatigue showing despite his efforts to hide it. "We can reach it by dawn if we travel through the night. And then we're safe. Safer, but not safe. There are others who hunt Apache, others who would see profit in capturing us." Clara absorbed this soberly. She was beginning to understand that for people like Nahuel, true safety was a luxury that might never be attainable. "What will we do, after we cross the border? Where will we go?" Nahuel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening desert. "There are places," he said finally, "remote settlements where questions are not asked, where a man and woman can live quietly if they do not draw attention to themselves." "You mean hide?" "I mean survive. Sometimes that is the best one can hope for." Clara studied his profile in the fading light, seeing the resignation in his expression. "Is that what you want, to spend the rest of your life hiding in remote villages, always looking over your shoulder?" "What I want and what is possible are different things." "Are they? Maybe there's another way." Nahuel turned to look at her, and Clara saw something she had never seen in his eyes before, hope, fragile and carefully guarded, but hope nonetheless. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that I'm tired of running, tired of letting other people dictate the terms of our lives." Clara took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his hard existence. "What if we stopped running and started fighting back? Clara, we are two people against what? Against men like Garrett who profit from hatred and violence, against a system that treats your people like animals to be hunted. Clara's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape in her mind. Maybe two people can't change everything, but they can change something. What exactly are you proposing? I don't know yet, but I know that my father has influence connections. He may have enemies, but he also has friends in government, in business, in the press. Clara turned to face Nahuel fully. What if instead of hiding from those connections we used them? Nahuel shook his head. Your father will never help an Apache. Even if he wanted to, it would destroy him politically. Maybe, or maybe he'll surprise us. Maybe when he learns what really happened to me, when he understands what kind of men he's been dealing with. You are dreaming, Clara. White men do not change their minds about Apache, not ever. Some white men don't, but others might if they're given a reason. Clara squeezed his hand. What if we could tell our story? Not just to my father, but to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who would listen. What if we could show them that the real savages aren't the Apache, but the men who hunt them for sport? For a long moment, Nahuel said nothing. Clara could see the internal struggle in his face, the desire to believe warring with years of bitter experience. Even if what you say is possible, he said finally, it would be dangerous. More dangerous than simply disappearing into Mexico. Everything worth doing is dangerous. And if we fail, if your father turns his back on you, if the newspapers refuse to print our story, if we accomplish nothing but making ourselves bigger targets? Clara considered this seriously. Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have fought for something instead of just running from it. A gunshot echoed through the canyon, distant but distinct. Their pursuers were still out there, still hunting. We should go, Nahuel said, rising to his feet. We can discuss this more when we are safe across the border. But as they gathered their few possessions and prepared to resume their flight, Clara could see that her words had planted a seed in his mind. The idea of fighting back instead of just surviving had taken root, and she knew that no matter what dangers lay ahead, their relationship to those dangers had fundamentally changed. They were no longer just refugees fleeing into exile. They were partners planning a campaign, lovers preparing to take on a world that had tried to destroy them both. The transformation was subtle but profound, and as they set off through the darkness toward the Mexican border, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since boarding that ill-fated train in Boston, hope for a future that was theirs to create. Behind them, the sound of pursuit continued, but it no longer seemed quite so threatening. Garrett and his men were still dangerous, still determined, but they were also fighting the last war while Clara and Nahuel had already begun planning for the next one. The desert night was alive with possibilities, and for the first time since this all began, Clara felt like she was running toward something instead of just away. The border was close now. She could feel it like a presence in the darkness ahead. But more than that, she could feel the future calling to them, uncertain and dangerous but alive with promise. They had survived the worst their enemies could throw at them. Now it was time to discover what they could accomplish when they stopped merely surviving and started truly living. The Mexican border materialized out of the desert darkness like a mirage made real, not a fence or wall, but simply a dry creek bed that marked where one nation ended and another began. Clara stumbled as they crossed it, her exhausted body finally giving in to the accumulated pain and fatigue of their flight. But even as Nahuel caught her and helped her to the rocky ground, she felt a surge of triumph. "We made it," she whispered, hardly daring to believe it. The first part, yes. Nahuel's eyes never stopped scanning the horizon behind them, watching for signs of pursuit. But crossing an invisible line does not make us safe. As if to prove his point, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the desert from the north. Garrett and his men had followed their trail through the night, and Clara could hear the fury in their voices as they realized how close they had come to their prey. Tracks end right here at the creek, one of them called out. Then they crossed into Mexico. Garrett replied, his voice tight with frustration. So what do? We can't just ride into another country. There was a long pause, and Clara held her breath, praying that even Garrett wouldn't be reckless enough to violate international law for the sake of a bounty. We wait, he said finally. Set up camp on our side of the border. They'll have to come back eventually, and when they do, we'll be ready. Clara's heart sank. Even if they were technically safe on the Mexican side of the creek bed, they were still trapped. Garrett could wait indefinitely, and eventually hunger or thirst would force them to take risks. Come, Nahuel said quietly, helping her to her feet. We must get farther from the border. They walked south through the pre-dawn darkness, following what appeared to be an old smuggler's trail that wound between stands of palo verde and mesquite. Clara's ankle had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, and each step sent lightning bolts of pain up her leg. But she gritted her teeth and kept going, knowing that stopping meant death or capture. As the first rays of sunlight began to paint the eastern sky, they crested a low hill and saw smoke rising from a valley below. Clara's pulse quickened at the sight. Where there was smoke, there were people, and people meant potential help. But Nahuel's expression remained cautious. A settlement, he said, but not necessarily a friendly one. What do you mean? This close to the border, it could be anything. Bandits, smugglers, fugitives like ourselves. Nahuel studied the distant buildings through narrowed eyes. Or it could be honest ranchers who would turn us over to the authorities for the reward money. Clara felt her hopes deflate. So what do? We take the risk. We have no choice now. The settlement proved to be larger than it had appeared. From the hilltop, perhaps 24 adobe buildings clustered around a central plaza with corrals and outbuildings scattered around the periphery. Clara could see people moving about their morning tasks, but something about the place felt wrong, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The children, she said, suddenly realizing what had been bothering her. There are no children. Nahuel nodded grimly. And the men all carry guns openly. This is not a farming village. They had reached the outskirts of the settlement now, and Clara could see that several of the inhabitants had noticed their approach. Men emerged from buildings, their hands resting casually on their weapons, studying the newcomers with hard, suspicious eyes. You there, one of them called out in Spanish-accented English. What is your business here? Nahuel stopped, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. We seek shelter and supplies. We can pay. Pay with what? Clara reached into her torn dress and pulled out a small leather pouch, part of her traveling funds that had somehow survived the train wreck and everything that followed. She held it up so the men could see the glint of gold coins. The effect was immediate. The suspicion in their faces was replaced by avarice, and Clara could practically see them calculating how much the pouch might contain. Well now, the spokesman said, his tone considerably more welcoming. Travelers with gold are always welcome in San Perdido. I am Carlos Mendez, the alcalde of this humble village. Clara doubted that this collection of desperados had anything as formal as an elected mayor, but she kept her skepticism to herself. I am Clara Whitmore, and this is my husband, Nahuel. She felt Nahuel start slightly at the word, but he played along with the deception. In a place like this, an unmarried couple would draw unwelcome attention, and Clara's reputation was the least of their current concerns. Welcome to San Perdido, Señor and Señora, Mendez said with an oily smile. Though I must ask, what brings gringos to our remote village? This is not exactly on the main road to anywhere. We had some trouble north of the border, Nahuel replied carefully. Bandits attacked our wagon train. We were lucky to escape with our lives. See, bandits are a terrible problem in these times. Mendez's expression was sympathetic, but Clara caught the calculating look in his eyes. But you are safe now. Come, we will find you food and shelter." He led them toward what appeared to be the village's only inn, a rambling adobe building with a wooden sign that read, La Cantina del Diablo. Clara wasn't sure if the name was supposed to be ironic, but given what she had seen of the settlement so far, she suspected it was depressingly accurate. The interior of the cantina was dim and smoky, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the walls. A handful of men sat at rough wooden tables nursing drinks and conducting conversations in low, furtive tones. All conversation stopped when Clara and Nahuel entered, and Clara felt the weight of hostile stares following their every movement. "Maria," Mendez called out to a tired-looking woman behind the bar, "food and drink for our guests." The woman Maria studied Clara with undisguised curiosity. It was clear that respectable women were a rarity in San Perdido, and Clara was acutely aware of how she must look after days in the desert. Her dress was torn and stained, her hair hung loose and tangled, and her face was burned by the sun. But Maria's attention quickly shifted to Nahuel, and Clara saw recognition flicker in her dark eyes. She leaned forward to whisper something urgent to Mendez, whose own expression immediately sharpened with interest. "Interesting," Mendez said, turning back to them with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maria thinks she knows you, amigo. She says you look very much like someone she has seen on wanted posters." Clara felt Nahuel tense beside her, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward his knife. The entire cantina had gone silent now, and she could sense the violent potential that hung in the air like smoke. "I think your Maria is mistaken," Nahuel said calmly. "I have never been in this region before." "Perhaps, but Maria has a very good memory for faces, especially valuable ones." Mendez gestured to one of his men who disappeared through a back door. "Why don't you sit down, have some food while we clarify this situation?" Clara knew they were in trouble. Whatever reputation Nahuel had built over the years had followed them even here to this lawless village on the wrong side of the border. She could see armed men positioning themselves near the exits, cutting off any chance of escape. "Of course," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're very tired." They took seats at a table near the center of the room, the worst possible position tactically, but refusing would only confirm their host's suspicions. Maria brought them plates of beans and tortillas along with cups of bitter coffee that tasted like it had been sitting over the fire for hours. Clara forced herself to eat, knowing she needed the strength, but the food tasted like ash in her mouth. Around them, the other patrons had resumed their conversations, but she could feel them listening, waiting for something to happen. The man Mendez had sent away returned a few minutes later carrying a yellowed piece of paper that he handed to his leader. Mendez studied it carefully, occasionally glancing up at Nahuel with growing excitement. "Most interesting," he said, finally rising from his own table and approaching theirs. "It seems Maria was correct. You are indeed a very valuable man, Senor Nahuel." The use of his real name sent a chill through Clara's blood. There was no point in pretending anymore. They had been identified, and now the only question was what Mendez intended to do about it. "The reward is quite substantial." Mendez continued, settling into a chair across from them without invitation. $500 from the American government, another $300 from the territorial authorities. For a poor village like ours, such money would be transformative. "And yet here we sit, sharing a meal," Nahuel observed. "Why is that?" Mendez laughed, a sound like grinding glass. "Because I am a businessman, not a fool. The rewards are good, but they require delivering you to the American authorities. That means crossing the border, dealing with officials, answering uncomfortable questions about how a wanted Apache came to be in my custody. Whereas dead men tell no tales," Clara said, understanding where this was leading. "Exactly. You are very perceptive, Senora. A dead Apache warrior is worth nothing to the authorities, but a live gringo woman. Now that has possibilities." Clara felt ice water flowing through her veins. What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that accidents happen. Bandits attack travelers, kill the men, carry off the women. Very tragic, but these things occur in the borderlands. Mendez's smile was reptilian. And if a beautiful gringo woman were to be sold to certain buyers, I know well, she would fetch a much better price than any government reward. The threat hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Clara could see Nahuel calculating odds, distances, angles of attack, but they were surrounded by armed men in an enclosed space with no clear path to escape. You seem to have thought this through, Nahuel said conversationally. I am a practical man. Why settle for government copper when there is gold to be had in the slave markets? That was the last mistake Carlos Mendez would ever make. Nahuel moved faster than Clara would have thought possible, his hand striking like a snake to grab Mendez by the throat. In the same motion, he swept the man's gun from its holster and pressed the barrel against his temple. The cantina erupted into chaos, men shouting and reaching for weapons, but Nahuel's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The first man who draws a gun will watch his leader die, he said in Spanish, his tone deadly calm. And then I will kill as many of the rest of you as I can before you bring me down. The room froze, every man caught between the desire to act and the fear of being the one who triggered a bloodbath. You cannot escape, one of them called out. There are too many of us. Perhaps. But ask yourselves, is Carlos worth your lives? Is the money he promised to share worth dying for? Nahuel pressed the gun harder against Mendez's skull, making the man whimper. Because I promise you, several of you will die before this is over. Clara could see the uncertainty in their faces. These were hard men, but they were also survivors, and survivors knew when the odds were against them. What do you want? Maria asked from behind the bar. Horses, supplies, safe passage out of your village. Nahuel's eyes never left the armed men surrounding them. In exchange, your leader lives, and we disappear forever. And if we refuse, then you can explain to your leader's widow why you let him die over a bounty you were never going to see anyway. Clara held her breath as the standoff stretched out. She could see the men weighing their options, calculating whether Mendez's life was worth the risk of challenging a legendary warrior in close quarters. Finally, one of them lowered his weapon. Get the horses, he said to another man, and supplies for 3 days. Make it 5 days, Nahuel corrected, and include ammunition. As the tension slowly drained from the room, Clara allowed herself to breathe again. But she knew this was far from over. Even if they got out of San Perdido alive, they would now have another set of enemies hunting them. The horses, when they were brought, proved to be decent animals, not the best in the village, but good enough for their purposes. Clara could see supplies being loaded into saddlebags under Nahuel's watchful supervision. You realize this changes nothing, Mendez wheezed as Nahuel finally released his throat. Word will spread. Every bounty hunter and bandit from here to Mexico City will be looking for you. Let them look, Nahuel replied. I have been hunted before. But now you have her to protect. That makes you weak, vulnerable. Mendez rubbed his bruised throat, his eyes malevolent. She will be your death, Apache. Mark my words. Nahuel didn't respond, but Clara could see the words had found their target. The truth was that she did make him more vulnerable, did force him to take risks he would never take for himself alone. They mounted up in the village plaza, surrounded by hostile faces, but no longer threatened by drawn guns. Clara's injured ankle screamed as she settled into the saddle, but she forced herself to show no weakness. Which way? She asked as they rode out of San Perdido. South for now, but we cannot go far in Mexico. Too many villages like this one, too many people willing to sell information for gold. Then we're back north, but not the way we came. Clara felt her heart sink. Back into American territory with Garrett waiting for us. Garrett expects us to run deeper into Mexico. He will not expect us to circle back. Nahuel's expression was grim but determined. Besides, if we are going to implement your plan to tell our story, to fight back instead of just hiding, we must eventually return to face our enemies. They rode hard for the rest of the day, putting distance between themselves and San Perdido. But Clara knew that their brief respite was over. Word of their presence would spread quickly through the network of smugglers and bandits that operated along the border. Soon every desperate man with a gun would be hunting them. As evening approached, they made camp in a rocky canyon that offered some protection from observation. Clara's ankle had swollen even more during the day's ride, and she could barely put weight on it when they dismounted. "Let me look at that," Nahuel said, kneeling beside her as she sat on a flat rock. His touch was gentle as he examined the injury, but Clara could see the concern in his dark eyes. The ankle was badly swollen and discolored clearly more than just a simple sprain. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. You may have broken something when you fell in the train wreck." Nahuel began binding the ankle with strips torn from his shirt. "You should not be riding." "I don't have much choice." "No, but I should have realized sooner how much pain you were in." Clara reached out to touch his cheek. "You had other things on your mind, like keeping us alive." "Your pain is my responsibility now." "My pain is my responsibility, just like your pain is yours." Clara met his eyes steadily. "We're partners in this, remember? Equal partners." Nahuel finished binding her ankle and sat back on his heels. In Apache culture, a man's primary duty is to protect his family. To fail in that duty is to lose honor. And in white culture, a woman's primary duty is to be helpless and decorative. But I stopped caring about that culture's expectations when I chose to follow you into the desert. Clara shifted position, trying to find a comfortable way to sit. Maybe it's time we made our own culture with our own expectations. Before Nahuel could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching, both of them tensed hands moving to weapons, but the riders who appeared at the mouth of their canyon wore different clothes than the bounty hunters they had been fleeing. These were Apache warriors, 3 men on painted ponies, their faces marked with war paint, their eyes hard with suspicion and anger. "Nahuel," the leader said, and Clara could hear both recognition and accusation in his voice. "Geronimo," Nahuel replied, rising slowly to his feet. "I did not expect to see you so far from the mountains. Nor I you, brother, especially traveling with this." Geronimo's eyes fixed on Clara with undisguised hostility. "When I heard the stories, I did not believe them. Nahuel the ghost taking a white woman as his companion, but here you are." Clara felt the weight of their stares, understanding that she was being judged not just as an individual, but as a representative of everything these men had suffered at the hands of her people. "Clara is not our enemy," Nahuel said carefully. "All whites are our enemy." One of the other warriors spat. "Their very presence on Apache land is a pollution." "This is not Apache land," Nahuel pointed out. "This is Mexico. The earth recognizes no borders drawn by white men," Geronimo replied, "and neither do I." He dismounted and approached them, his hand resting on his war club. "Tell me, brother, has she made you forget who you are, forget what her people have done to ours?" "I have forgotten nothing." "Then why do you protect her? Why do you not take your revenge on one of the spawn of our destroyers?" Clara could see the tension building between the two men, could sense the years of shared history and mutual respect being tested by this confrontation. She knew that her presence was forcing Nahuel to choose between his loyalty to his people and his feelings for her. Because revenge is a poison that destroys the one who drinks it, Nahuel said finally. "I have chosen to seek healing instead of vengeance." Geronimo's eyes flashed with anger. "Healing while our people rot on reservations, while our children are stolen and sent to white schools to have their spirits broken, while our sacred places are desecrated by miners and ranchers. My choosing not to kill one white woman will not solve any of those problems. But it sends a message. It tells our people that Nahuel the ghost has gone soft, has been tamed by a pretty face and a warm bed." The insult hung in the air like a challenge, and Clara could see Nahuel's hand moving toward his knife. She had to act quickly before this confrontation turned violent. "You're right," she said, rising to her feet despite the pain in her ankle. "I am your enemy." All three Apache warriors turned to stare at her, surprise replacing anger on their faces. "I am the daughter of a man who profits from your suffering," she continued. "I was raised to believe that Apache were savages who deserved whatever happened to them. I wore dresses made from cotton picked by slave labor and ate food grown on land stolen from your people." Geronimo's eyes narrowed. "And then why should we not kill you where you stand? Because killing me won't change any of that. But letting me live might." "Explain." Clara took a deep breath, knowing that her next words might determine whether she lived or died. "I have seen what men like Garrett do in the name of civilization. I have seen the truth behind the stories my people tell about yours. And I have connections, resources, a voice that some white people might actually listen to. What are you proposing? That instead of killing me as a symbol of everything you hate, you use me as a weapon against the system that oppresses you?" Clara met Geronimo's fierce gaze without flinching. "Let me tell the world what I have seen. Let me bear witness to the truth of what is happening to your people. The white world does not care about truth. Some of it doesn't, but some of it might. If the message comes from someone they can't dismiss as easily as they dismiss Apache voices." Geronimo studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. "And what would you ask in return for this service?" "Nothing, except the chance to help right a wrong that my people have committed." "And him?" Geronimo nodded toward Nahuel. "What becomes of the great warrior who has forgotten how to hate? He remembers how to love," Clara said simply. "And sometimes love is a stronger weapon than hate." The silence stretched out between them, broken only by the distant cry of a night bird and the soft snorting of their horses. Clara could see the internal struggle playing out on Geronimo's face as he weighed her words against years of bitter experience. Finally, he spoke. "There is a gathering," he said reluctantly. "Leaders from many bands coming together to discuss what must be done about the reservation system. Some counsel war, others seek accommodation with the white authorities." "Where?" Nahuel asked. "The Sacred Canyon, 3 days' ride north of here. If you wish to test this white woman's words, bring her there. Let her speak to all the leaders. Let them judge whether her voice has value." Clara felt a thrill of excitement mixed with terror. This was exactly the opportunity she had been hoping for, a chance to address Apache leaders directly to make her case for a different kind of resistance. But she also understood the danger. If the leaders rejected her proposal, if they saw her as just another lying white, she might not leave that gathering alive. "We will be there," Nahuel said. Geronimo nodded curtly. "See that you are, and brother." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "I hope for your sake that she is what she claims to be. Because if she betrays you, if this is all some elaborate trap, I will kill her myself. And then I will kill you for bringing shame on our people." With that ominous promise, the 3 Apache warriors mounted their ponies and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clara and Nahuel alone with the weight of what they had agreed to. "Are you certain about this?" Nahuel asked. "The gathering will be dangerous. Some of those leaders have never seen a white person who wasn't trying to kill them." "I'm certain," Clara replied, though her heart was hammering with fear. "This is our chance to stop running and start fighting back. I won't waste it." Nahuel nodded slowly. "Then we ride north at dawn, but Clara..." He took her hands in his dark eyes serious. "If things go badly at the gathering, if the leaders turn against you, I want you to know that whatever happens, these past days with you have been the happiest of my life." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Don't talk like that. We're going to survive this. We're going to change things." "Perhaps, But in case we do not, I needed you to know." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, then pouring all her love and determination into the contact. When they broke apart, she could see her own resolve reflected in his eyes. "We're going to make this work," she said fiercely. "We're going to prove that love is stronger than hate, that understanding is possible even between enemies." "I believe you," Nahuel said, and for the first time since she had known him, Clara heard no doubt in his voice. As they settled down to sleep under the vast canopy of desert stars, Clara felt the future spreading out before them like an uncharted map. There would be danger ahead, challenges that would test everything they believed about themselves and each other. But for the first time since this whole adventure began, she felt like they were moving toward something instead of just running away. The gathering would be their chance to prove that their love could be more than just a personal refuge. It could be a force for change in a world that desperately needed healing. The stars wheeled overhead, in their ancient patterns indifferent to human struggles and dreams. But Clara looked up at them and saw not indifference but possibility, not emptiness but infinite potential for transformation. Tomorrow they would begin the most dangerous part of their journey, but tonight, lying beside the man she loved. Under the desert sky, Clara Whitmore had never felt more alive. The sacred canyon revealed itself at sunset on the third day, a hidden sanctuary carved deep into the heart of the mountains where ancient spirits were said to dwell among the towering red walls. Clara felt her breath catch as they descended the narrow trail, her eyes taking in the impossible beauty of the place. Natural arches spanning the canyon like cathedral vaults, springs of crystal clear water bubbling from the rock, and everywhere the sense of something timeless and sacred. "This is where it all began," Nahuel said quietly as they rode deeper into the canyon, "where the first Apache received the sacred teachings, where the old ways were born." Clara could see why. There was something about this place that seemed to exist outside of ordinary time, as if the very stones held memories of ceremonies and councils stretching back countless generations. And everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of the current gathering smoke from cooking fires, horses grazing in hidden meadows, the distant sound of voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. "How many?" she asked, noting the number of different camps scattered throughout the canyon. "More than I expected. Leaders from bands I thought had been scattered or destroyed years ago." Nahuel's voice carried both wonder and concern. "This gathering represents the last free Apache in all the territories. If your plan fails here..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Clara understood that this might be the last chance for a peaceful solution, the final opportunity to find a path between total war and complete surrender. They were spotted long before they reached the main council area. Warriors materialized from hidden positions among the rocks, their faces painted for war, their weapons held ready, but not yet threatening. Clara felt the weight of their stares as she rode past, knowing that news of her presence would spread quickly through the assembled bands. At the heart of the canyon, where the walls opened into a natural amphitheater, they found the council fire. Perhaps 50 men sat in a great circle around the flames, their faces grave with the weight of the decisions they had come here to make. Clara recognized some of them from wanted posters and newspaper illustrations, legendary war chiefs whose names struck fear into the hearts of settlers across the Southwest. And there, directly across the fire from where they had stopped, sat a figure that made Clara's blood run cold. Even without the military uniform, even dressed in the rough clothes of a frontier scout, she recognized Lieutenant Marcus Garrett immediately. "Nahuel," she whispered urgently, but he had already seen the man who had murdered his family. For a moment, time seemed suspended. The two men stared at each other across the council fire, years of hatred and pain flowing between them like an electric current. Clara could see Nahuel's hand moving toward his knife, could feel the terrible tension building in his body. But before either man could act, Geronimo rose from his place in the circle and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the canyon. My brothers, we have among us tonight one who claims to speak for the white woman's people, one who says she can be a voice for justice where Apache voices are not heard. His eyes found Clara's. Step forward, daughter of our enemies, and let the council judge your words. Clara dismounted carefully, her injured ankle protesting as she put weight on it. Every eye in the gathering was fixed on her now, and she could feel the mixture of curiosity, hostility, and skepticism radiating from the assembled leaders. She walked toward the council fire on unsteady legs, acutely aware of how she must appear to these hardened warriors, a white woman in a torn dress, her face burned by the sun, her hair hanging loose and tangled. She looked nothing like the refined lady who had boarded that train in Boston, and she realized that this transformation was exactly what gave her words their power. I am Clara Whitmore. She began, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Daughter of James Whitmore, whose money has helped build the railroads that cut through your lands, whose influence has supported the policies that drive your people onto reservations. A murmur ran through the circle at this admission, but Clara pressed on. I was raised to believe that Apache were savages, that the wars between our peoples were justified because you were less than human. She turned slowly, meeting the eyes of as many leaders as she could. I was taught these lies because they served the interests of men, like my father, men who profit from your suffering. Then why should we not kill you for the sins of your people? The question came from a scarred warrior whose English carried the harsh accent of years spent fighting on the frontier. Because killing me would accomplish nothing, Clara replied. I am one woman. My death would change no laws, save no lives, restore no stolen land. But my voice, speaking the truth about what I have witnessed, might accomplish what Apache voices cannot. What have you witnessed? This from an older chief, his gray hair braided with eagle feathers. Clara took a deep breath, knowing that everything depended on her next words. I have witnessed the massacre of innocent travelers by men who claim to represent civilization. I have seen bounty hunters murder Apache women and children for sport, then collect government rewards for their scalps. I have watched soldiers burn villages and call it justice. These things are well known to us, another warrior said dismissively. Why should white men believe them when you tell the story? Because I am one of them, because I cannot be dismissed as easily as Apache testimony is dismissed. Clara's voice grew stronger as she found her rhythm. When James Whitmore's daughter tells the world that the Apache are the victims, not the aggressors in this conflict, people will listen. When I testify that men like Lieutenant Garrett are the real savages, newspapers will print my words. At the mention of his name, Garrett rose from his place in the circle. Clara was shocked to see him here in the heart of Apache territory, apparently sitting in council with the very people he had spent years hunting. You seem surprised to see me, Miss Whitmore, he said with a cold smile. Did you think you were the only one capable of changing sides in this conflict? You're working with them. Clara couldn't hide her disbelief. I'm working for myself, as I always have. The Apache have made me a better offer than the territorial government ever did. Geronimo's expression was grim as he explained. This man came to us 3 moons ago, claiming to have information about army troop movements, about planned attacks on our remaining free bands. In exchange, he asked only for sanctuary and a share of whatever spoils we might take. And you trusted him. Clara looked around the circle in amazement. This is the man who burned villages, who murdered families, who knows the white man's ways of war better than any Apache, Garrett interrupted, who has been on both sides of this conflict and understands how it will end. His eyes found Nahuel across the fire. Your Apache friend there has been playing at being a warrior, but he's never understood the larger game. This isn't about individual battles or personal revenge. This is about survival, and the Apache cannot survive by fighting the United States Army. So you counsel surrender. Nahuel spoke for the first time since they had arrived, his voice deadly quiet. I counsel wisdom. The Apache are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Your ammunition is running low. Your food sources are being systematically destroyed. Your water holes are being poisoned or guarded by troops. Garrett's voice carried the authority of someone who had helped implement these very strategies. You can fight and die as free men, or you can surrender and live as wards of the government. Those are your only choices. There is a third choice, Clara said, stepping into the circle of firelight. You can tell your story to the world. You can make the American people understand what is being done in their name. Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The American people don't care about Apache suffering, Miss Whitmore. They care about safety, prosperity, and the manifest destiny that gives them the right to take whatever they want from whoever is too weak to stop them. Some of them don't care, Clara admitted, but others might if they knew the truth, if they understood that this isn't a war between civilization and savagery, but between greed and justice. Pretty words, said the scarred warrior who had spoken before, but words do not stop bullets. Words do not feed hungry children. No, but words can change laws, words can change policies, words can turn public opinion against the men who profit from this conflict. Clara turned to address the entire circle. Right now, the American people only hear one side of this story. They read newspapers that call every Apache a bloodthirsty savage, that justify every atrocity as necessary for the protection of innocent settlers. But what if they heard a different story? What if they learned that the real savages wear blue uniforms and collect government bounties for Apache scalps? And how would you tell this story? Geronimo asked. Who would listen to the words of one white woman against the entire territorial government? My father has connections in Washington, in New York, and Boston. He knows senators, congressmen, newspaper editors, business leaders. Clara's voice grew more confident as she outlined her plan. When James Whitmore's daughter tells them that the Apache War is built on lies and maintained for profit, they will have to listen. Your father will disown you the moment you speak out against his interests, Garrett said with cruel satisfaction. You'll lose everything, your family, your fortune, your place in society. And for what? To save a people who are doomed anyway. Clara felt the truth of his words like a physical blow. He was right, speaking out would cost her everything she had ever known. But as she looked around the circle at the faces of the Apache leaders, she realized that everything she had ever known was built on a foundation of lies and blood. Then I'll lose it, she said simply. Better to be disowned by a father who profits from genocide than to be welcomed by him. A murmur ran through the circle at this declaration, and Clara could see that her words had made an impact. These were men who understood sacrifice, who had given up everything to preserve their people's freedom. There is still the question of whether we can trust her, said the gray-haired chief. She speaks of sacrifice, but words are easy. How do we know she will not betray us when the cost becomes real? Because she has already sacrificed everything, Nahuel said, rising to stand beside Clara. She gave up her old life to save mine. She chose exile over comfort, danger over safety. She has proven herself in ways that go beyond words. Has she? Garrett's voice dripped with malice. Or has she simply been playing a longer game than we realized? He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and held it up for all to see. Did you know, Miss Whitmore, that there's a substantial reward for your safe return, $5,000 posted by your loving father for anyone who brings you home unharmed? Clara felt the world tilt around her. That's impossible. My father thinks I'm dead. Your father knows exactly where you are. He's been tracking your progress through his network of business associates and government contacts. Garrett's smile was triumphant. The train wreck, the pursuit, your flight into Mexico, it's all been reported back to him. And do you know what his response was? Not grief, not panic, but calculation. He's been using your disappearance to build sympathy for his position, to gain support for even harsher measures against the Apache. The words hit Clara like physical blows. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Then explain this." Garrett unfolded the paper and read aloud. $5,000 reward for the safe return of Miss Clara Whitmore, beloved daughter kidnapped by Apache savages. Any information leading to her rescue will be generously compensated by her grieving father, James Whitmore. He looked up with cruel satisfaction. "Posted in every newspaper from here to Boston, along with your photograph and a detailed description of your companion." Clara felt sick as the implication sank in. If her father knew she was alive, if he was actively working to have her rescued, then her disappearance was indeed being used to justify increased violence against the Apache. "You see," Garrett continued, pressing his advantage, "she's not a convert to your cause. She's bait in a trap you've all walked into. Every day she remains free, her father gains more support for his war against your people. And when she's finally rescued, she'll tell whatever story serves his interests best." The suspicion in the Apache leaders' faces was plain now, and Clara could see that Garrett's revelation had undermined everything she had worked to build. "It's not true," she said desperately. "I didn't know about any reward. I would never, wouldn't you?" The gray-haired chief studied her with new hostility. "Your people are masters of deception. Perhaps this has all been an elaborate performance designed to learn our plans, our hiding places, our weaknesses." "No, I swear to you, I had no knowledge of this. I chose to stay with Nahuel, chose to help your people because it was the right thing to do. Or because it was the role you were assigned to play," Garrett said smoothly. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, when did you first begin developing feelings for your Apache captor? Was it before or after you realized how valuable such feelings might be in gaining his trust?" Clara felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she had said, every gesture of solidarity she had made, was now being reinterpreted through the lens of suspicion and betrayal. "Nahuel," she turned to him desperately, "you know me. You know I'm not acting, not pretending. What we have between us is real." But when she looked into his eyes, she saw doubt there for the first time since they had met. The revelation about her father's reward had shaken him as much as it had the others, and Clara realized that even Nahuel was beginning to question whether their entire relationship had been built on lies. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said quietly, and Clara felt her heart break at the pain in his voice. "Believe this?" she said, pulling out the small leather pouch that contained her remaining gold coins. She threw it into the council fire where the flames caught the leather and began to consume her last connection to her former life. "I renounce my father's money, his influence, his protection. I choose exile over privilege, truth over comfort." The dramatic gesture had its effect. She could see the Apache leaders reconsidering their judgment. But Garrett wasn't finished. "A touching performance," he said sarcastically, "but meaningless. Your father's money will always be there for you whenever you choose to return to his embrace. Gold burned in a fire can be replaced. Trust once broken cannot." "Then what would you have me do?" Clara demanded. "What proof would satisfy you that my commitment is real?" "Prove it by ending this charade," Garrett replied. "Admit that you were sent here to spy on the Apache, to learn their plans and report back to your father." "I will not admit to lies." "Then prove your loyalty in a way that cannot be questioned." Garrett's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "Kill him." The demand hung in the air like a physical presence. Clara stared at Garrett in shock, barely able to process what he had just suggested. "What? Kill Lieutenant Marcus Garrett," he said calmly. "The man who murdered Nahuel's family, who has been responsible for countless Apache deaths. If your conversion is real, if your hatred of your own people's crimes is genuine, then execute the worst war criminal in this territory." Clara looked around the circle and saw that the Apache leaders were considering Garrett's proposal seriously. To them, it made perfect sense. What better way to test her loyalty than to demand she kill one of their greatest enemies. But Clara could see the trap. Garrett wasn't really offering himself as a sacrifice to test her commitment. He was maneuvering her into a position where she would be forced to commit murder, to cross a line that would change her forever and bind her to the Apache cause through blood guilt rather than genuine conviction. "I won't kill anyone," she said firmly. "Not him, not anyone else. If my word isn't enough to prove my loyalty, then perhaps I don't belong here after all." "You see," Garrett said triumphantly, "when faced with real action, real sacrifice, she reveals her true nature. She is still a pampered white woman who thinks she can change the world with pretty speeches and good intentions." The murmur of agreement from some of the Apache leaders told Clara that Garrett's words were finding their mark. She was losing them, losing any chance of building the alliance she had dreamed of. That's when Nahuel stepped forward, his knife gleaming in his hand. "You want blood to prove loyalty," he said, his voice carrying deadly promise. "Then let me provide it." "Nahuel, no," Clara said urgently. "Don't let him manipulate you into this. He killed my family," Nahuel replied, his eyes never leaving Garrett's face. "He burned my mother alive. I have carried the hunger for his death for 8 years. And if you kill him now, you'll become exactly what he wants you to be, a savage who solves problems with violence." Clara stepped between them, facing Nahuel with desperate determination. "You told me that revenge was poison. You said you wanted to choose healing over vengeance." "That was before I knew he was here, before I had the chance to balance the scales." "The scales will never balance. Killing him won't bring back your family. It will only make you into the monster he claims you are." Garrett laughed at the exchange. "Listen to her, Nahuel. Listen to the white woman telling you to forgive your family's murderer. Does that sound like someone who truly understands Apache justice?" Clara could see that her words were having no effect. The bloodlust was building in Nahuel's eyes, 8 years of suppressed rage, finally finding its target. In moments he would launch himself at Garrett, and the careful balance she had been trying to build would collapse into chaos and violence. That's when she made her choice. "You want proof of my commitment," she said, turning to address the entire council. "You want evidence that I've truly chosen your people over my own." Without another word, she pulled out the small derringer she had hidden in her dress, a lady's weapon she had carried since Boston but never imagined using. Before anyone could react, she turned and fired directly at Marcus Garrett. The bullet took him in the chest, spinning him around and dropping him beside the council fire. The canyon erupted into chaos as warriors leaped to their feet, weapons appearing in their hands as they tried to process what had just happened. Clara stood over Garrett's bleeding form, the smoking derringer still in her hand, her face as pale as moonlight. "There," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have crossed the line. I have killed for your people. Are you satisfied now?" Garrett coughed, blood speckling his lips, but his eyes still held their malicious gleam. "Doesn't matter," he gasped. "Too late. Already sent word. Army coming. Tomorrow." The words hit the gathering like thunderbolts. If Garrett was telling the truth, if he had indeed betrayed the location of this sacred gathering, then every Apache leader in the territory was walking into a trap. "How many soldiers?" Geronimo demanded, kneeling beside the dying man. "3 companies, cavalry, infantry." Garrett's voice was growing weaker. "Surrounded, already, no escape." Clara felt the world spinning around her as she realized what she had done. In her desperation to prove her loyalty, she had killed the one man who might have been able to tell them the specifics of the army's plan. "We must scatter," one of the chiefs said urgently. "Leave the canyon immediately before they arrive." "No," Geronimo said firmly. "If we run now separately, they will hunt us down one by one. Our only chance is to stand together to make our last fight here in this sacred place." "Last fight?" Clara looked around the circle in horror. "You mean to die here?" "Better to die free than live in chains." the gray-haired chief replied. "This is a good place to make our final stand." Clara stared at them in disbelief. These proud, intelligent leaders were preparing to throw their lives away in a gesture of defiance that would accomplish nothing except to give their enemies exactly what they wanted: the complete elimination of Apache resistance. "There has to be another way," she said desperately. "What way?" Nahuel asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "Garrett was right about one thing: we cannot fight the entire United States Army." Clara looked down at the weapon in her hand, still warm from firing, then at the faces of the Apache leaders preparing for a suicidal last stand. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was falling apart. In this moment of triumph turned to disaster. But then, through the despair and chaos, an idea began to form. "What if we don't fight them?" she said suddenly. What if instead of giving them the battle they expect, we give them something else entirely? Clara's mind was racing now, seeing possibilities where before there had been only doom. "Garrett betrayed your location, but he also gave us advance warning. What if we use that warning to turn this trap against them?" The Apache leaders stared at her, trying to follow her logic. "They're expecting to find you here tomorrow, probably planning a dawn attack when you'll be sleeping and unprepared," Clara continued. "But what if they find something different? What if they find an empty canyon and evidence that their secret operation was anything but secret?" "You're talking about abandoning the sacred canyon," one of the chiefs protested, "fleeing like cowards." "I'm talking about surviving to fight another day, about making your enemies look like fools while you live to continue the struggle." Clara turned to address the entire circle. "If you stay here and die, you become martyrs. But martyrs can't protect their people. If you escape this trap and expose it to the world, you become something much more dangerous. You become proof that the Apache cannot be defeated by treachery and superior numbers." She could see that her words were making an impact, that the leaders were beginning to consider alternatives to a glorious death. "But how do we escape without leaving tracks they can follow?" Nahuel asked. "We don't escape," Clara said, with growing excitement. "We disappear. We make it look like you were never here at all, like Garrett's information was wrong or outdated. Impossible. There are too many signs of our presence. Then we create different signs. We stage the canyon to tell a different story." Clara was thinking out loud now, her journalist's mind spinning possibilities. What if the army arrives tomorrow to find evidence of a meeting that took place weeks ago, old fire pits, scattered belongings left behind by a long-departed gathering? The idea was taking hold now, and Clara could see the Apache leaders beginning to understand the possibilities. "We could split into small groups," Geronimo said slowly. "Leave by different routes using the old trails that the army doesn't know about. And leave behind just enough evidence to suggest this gathering happened long before Garrett could have learned about it," another chief added, "making him look like a fool or a liar to his army contacts." Clara finished, "destroying his credibility and buying you time to regroup." The transformation in the gathering was remarkable. Where moments before there had been resigned preparation for death, now there was energetic planning for survival and deception. But even as the Apache leaders began organizing their escape, Clara felt the full weight of what she had done settling on her shoulders. She had killed a man, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The carefully cultivated lady from Boston was truly dead, now replaced by someone harder, more ruthless, more willing to pay the ultimate price for her convictions. Nahuel appeared beside her as the other leaders dispersed to begin their preparations. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Clara looked down at Garrett's body, already growing cold beside the dying council fire. "I don't know. I've never killed anyone before." "He deserved to die." "Maybe, but I'm not sure I had the right to be his executioner." Clara met Nahuel's eyes. "I did it to prove my loyalty to your people, but I think I really did it to prove something to myself." "What?" that I was capable of choosing justice over law, right over comfort, truth over the lies I was raised to believe. Clara felt tears starting to flow down her cheeks. But now I wonder if justice and murder are the same thing. Nahuel took her hands gently, careful not to startle her. In Apache culture, we believe that some deaths restore balance to the world. Garrett's death may have saved dozens of Apache lives by preventing this trap from succeeding. And if it didn't, if the army comes anyway and people die because of my actions, then we will face that when it happens. But tonight, you gave my people something they had almost lost hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope for victory. As the Apache leaders continued their preparations for the Great Deception, Clara found herself staring up at the star-filled sky above the sacred canyon. Somewhere out there, army companies were moving into position for what they believed would be the final battle of the Apache Wars. But if her plan worked, they would find only emptiness and the lingering echoes of dreams that refused to die. She had traveled farther from her comfortable Boston beginning than she had ever imagined possible. The pampered debutante who had boarded that train weeks ago would not have recognized the woman she had become, a killer, a revolutionary, a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for generations. But for the first time since this whole journey began, Clara felt like she knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. She was Clara Whitmore, daughter of privilege who had chosen exile, woman of peace who had chosen war, voice of her people, who had chosen to speak for their enemies. And tomorrow, when the army arrived to find their trap empty, and their informant discredited, the real war would begin, not the crude conflict of bullets and blood that had dominated the frontier, but the subtler war of words and witness of truth against lies, of justice against profit. It was a war that Clara intended to win, no matter what the cost to herself or her old life might be. The Apache had given her a new identity, a new purpose, a new reason to live. Now it was time to prove worthy of that gift by helping them claim their place in a world that had tried to erase them entirely. The sacred canyon would be empty by dawn, but the seeds of a different kind of victory had been planted in its ancient soil. And Clara Whitmore, no longer the woman she had been, but not yet the woman she would become, stood ready to nurture those seeds with everything she had learned about love, sacrifice, and the terrible, beautiful price of choosing to stand with truth against the world.